Chapter 226, Attack. Who are you? Ah! Enemy attack! Enemy attack! Ha ha ha! Kill them all! Kill them all! At this moment, there was a commotion outside the tent, as if something had attacked. What happened? Nina quickly stuffed the remaining soul of Viscount Carson into her mouth, and then with a whoosh, she flew out of the tent. Soon, half a head grew out of the tent. Nina shouted to Heath, "You are under attack. There are 2 enemies. They should be dark wizards." Dark wizards. Heath walked out of the tent. The riot happened in a corner of the camp. Heath's apprentices and the warriors were fighting fiercely with 2 unfamiliar wizards. The woman looked to be about 30 years old. She had purple hair and a seductive figure. She looked mature and charming, but her attacks were unusually brutal and bloody. Long thorns grew out of the woman's 5 fingers. She laughed maniacally as she waved the thorns at the surrounding warriors. These thorns were extremely powerful and easily tore the warriors into pieces. The other one was a fatty. He looked no different from an ordinary fatty except for the fact that his mouth was exceptionally huge. This huge mouth seemed to be the ability of this fatty. His bite force was extremely astonishing. Regardless of whether it was the long sword or the axe that the soldiers stabbed over, or even the spells that Martha and the rest threw over, he could actually swallow them all in one bite. Any soldier who was unable to dodge in time would be grabbed by the fatty and stuffed into his mouth. Following that, a few caw-caw sounds could be heard, and the soldier would be chewed into pieces. It looked exceptionally terrifying. Damn it, why can't they be killed? They can't be killed. Quickly find the commander, find the commander. Both of them were official rank wizards. They were on a completely different level of existence compared to ordinary knights. There was nothing these ordinary knights could do about them. After the 2 of them charged into the camp, they were like fierce tigers pouncing into a flock of sheep. The warriors who rushed forward one after another were easily torn into pieces. Fresh blood and pieces of corpses were scattered everywhere. Seeing that the situation was in imminent danger, at this moment. Hoo! Hoo! Suddenly, the sound of rushing wind was heard. A black fireball drew an arc in the air and then fell straight towards the fatty on the battlefield. Dessert! The fatty shouted happily and jumped up. He opened his big mouth and swallowed the black ball. However, the moment the black ball entered his mouth, the fatty felt that something was wrong and the smile on his face froze. He was like a toad that had swallowed a bug. He hurriedly opened his mouth and vomited. After vomiting, the shocking thing was that he had actually turned his stomach out. The entire stomach had been completely polluted to a black color. Some parts of it had even corroded into small holes. The black acidic sewage was still flowing freely on top of it, and the corrosion was also spreading rapidly in all directions. If it was a normal person with such an injury, they would definitely not be able to survive. However, Fatty had forcefully pulled his stomach out. Immediately, flesh sprouted out from his wound and expanded rapidly. The stomach pouch that was pulled out recovered in an instant and was swallowed back by him. The entire process seemed to be a long one, but in fact, it only lasted for an instant. "Sir Wizard, it's Sir Wizard! Sir Wizard is back!" The battlefield was suddenly filled with surprised shouts. The soldiers on the battlefield all looked in one direction. Heath slowly walked over. "Sir Wizard! Sir Wizard!" Recently, Heath went out hunting every day. Many warriors had seen his fighting strength with their own eyes. Some of them had even fought with him. His strength was deeply rooted in these warriors. Seeing his arrival, they cheered as if they had seen their savior. "Wizard!" Lottie Chona looked at Alf, who was suffering beside her, and then turned to look at Heath, who was walking over. Her eyes were filled with curiosity. She knew Alf's physique. He had undergone a deep body transformation and fused with the ability to devour. He could easily take even an official spell. However, he was injured by a strange spell just now. "Are you the wizard who killed Mule's disciple?" Lottie Chona asked curiously. "Mule's?" Heath asked. "A witch," Lottie Chona answered. "Her hands are a pair of bells." "I never remember nameless people," Heath said. Lottie Chona was stunned at first, then the corners of her mouth curled up. "Arrogant brat, do you know who is standing in front of you?" As she spoke, she took out a badge and waved it in front of her eyes. Many of the knights present were from wizard families. The moment the badge was abandoned, they immediately recognized the identity of the badge. "Truth. Church of Truth." The knights' expressions changed at the same time. Some of the knights even took a step back involuntarily. The tension that had just been eased quickly spread again. The notorious dark wizard organization, the Church of Truth, had long been well known in the field of wizards. Their bloody and brutal methods were basically well known, and it was not an exaggeration to say that they were terrified at the mere mention of it. Compared to the knight's nervousness, Heath's expression was calm. When the two dark wizards mentioned the woman with the bell hands, he had already guessed the identity of the other party. Heath sneered, "Looks like my luck is not bad. I'll take your heads." A battle was inevitable. Since that was the case, he might as well try to provoke the other party. It was the easiest way to gain an advantage in a battle when the enemy was not clear-headed. Of course, although he was arrogant, Heath was secretly very alert. He was constantly reminding the other party and quickly looking for flaws. Although Heath's plan was simple, the simpler the plan, the easier it would be. Ha! Even a clay figurine had some blood in it, not to mention the infamous dark wizard in front of him. Heath's repeated insults successfully angered the dark wizard in front of him. Lady Chona sneered and said coldly, "I promise I won't let you die so easily, whether it's your body or your soul." After pausing for a moment, she waved her hand and said to the fat dark wizard beside her, "Alf, bite him and leave him alive." This fat dark wizard was obviously a simple-minded type. After being tricked by Heath, his eyes had been red and were on the verge of exploding. Hearing Laticona's order, he immediately roared, "I'll tear you into pieces." Then he charged at Heath. The war, which had been quiet for a moment, began again. Chapter 227, Fight. The battle began once again. The furious fatty, Alf, immediately jumped and rushed towards Heath. As he ran, his body expanded at an incredible speed. In an instant, his body expanded to a height of more than 10 meters. It was like a small mountain. Rumble. The enlarged fatty ran as if the earth was shaking, and the entire ground shook. "Protect Sir Wizard! Protect Sir Wizard! Stop him!" The knights tried to stop him, but they could not stop such a huge creature. The knights were knocked away by the impact. They fell to the ground in an instant. Alf rushed to Heath after taking 2 steps. "I'm going to beat you into a meat patty!" He roared angrily, then raised his fist and smashed it heavily at Heath's head. The huge fist was like a meteorite falling from the sky, and there was a shocking sound of rushing wind in the air. Just in time. Facing this head-on heavy blow, not only did Heath not show any fear, but there was a hint of excitement in his eyes. He snorted lightly and pulled out Red Demon at the same time with a clanging sound, slashing his sword at the fist of the fatty. Boom! A loud sound rang out. The space between Red Demon's and the fatty's fists distorted for a moment, forming a material ripple, as if a stone had been thrown into the surface of a calm lake. That layer of ripple rapidly spread out in all directions. The seemingly ordinary ripple actually possessed an extraordinary strength, and all the knights in the surroundings who came into contact with it were directly swept away. Moreover, this was merely the aftermath of the two people's strength. One could imagine just what kind of tremendous strength the two people in the middle of the battle had to endure. Dang! 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 Dong! 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 2 heavy footsteps sounded at the same time. Heath and Alf were involuntarily pushed back several steps by a huge force. A deep pit was left on the ground with each step they took. After taking 7 or 8 steps back, Heath stopped and looked at the huge fatty opposite him in surprise. One had to know that he was already a Grand Knight. His strength coefficient had exceeded 50 points. With the support of the strength of a Grand Knight, the amount of energy he could release would definitely be less than 100 degrees. This fatty was able to fight him head-on at 100 degrees. His strength would definitely not be less than 100 points. Tisk tisk. 100 points of strength, is he a wizard with body modifications again? This had already surpassed the strength of ordinary creatures. Other than body modifications, Heath could not think of any other spell that could allow a person's basic strength to reach such a level. Another fatty. This made Heath involuntarily think of the dark wizard fatty from the previous experience. It was also similar to this fatty in front of him. He did not know if it was a coincidence or if the fatties liked to mess around with his own body. While Heath was thinking, the fat man rushed up again and attacked him with his huge fist. Heath did not show any signs of weakness. He waved his sword to fight against Alf. For a moment, deafening noises were heard one after another, and the space between them rippled one after another. Under these ripples, ordinary people could not move within 30 feet. Even the few advanced level knights present were easily swept away. This. What kind of terrifying strength is this? Is this a battle between wizards? The knights were extremely shocked. After exchanging a few blows, a wave of numbness spread from Heath's palm. It was even showing signs of cracking. However, the more Heath fought, the braver he became. He felt the strong wind that was coming towards him, and his heart was boiling. It had to be said that this kind of most primitive battle of strength was the easiest to arouse a man's desire to fight. Both sides were fighting hard, but at this time, a vine silently surged up from the bottom of Heath's feet and coiled up like a snake, entangling him. Heath frowned. At the same time, the space in front of him distorted for a moment, and then a figure quietly appeared in the distorted space. It was the purple-haired witch over there. It was the official level space-type spell, teleportation. After suddenly appearing in front of Heath, Chona raised her hand and grabbed at Heath across the space. Where her sharp claws fell, the space distorted, and several sharp blades appeared in the space at the same time. It was as if the space had been cut open. Just as Heath was about to be torn apart by the spatial blade, his body suddenly lost its color and became blurry, as if he had turned into a phantom. The sharp blade cut through the phantom easily. Shadow. Before she could regain her senses, the black shadow suddenly distorted and expanded rapidly. A surge of energy also surged in the space, as if it was about to explode. Shadow. Laticona's expression changed, and she hurriedly retreated. However, at this moment, an invisible force field suddenly enveloped her, firmly holding her in place. At the crucial moment, Fatty Alf rushed over from the other side, opened his monster-like huge mouth, and swallowed the black shadow in one gulp. Bang! With a loud bang, Fatty Alf's body instantly swelled up like a balloon that had been blown up. It lasted for a full few seconds before it finally gradually recovered. This time, it seemed that Alf was also heavily injured. His huge body shook violently, and his knees immediately kneeled on the ground. Cough! Cough! He let out a series of violent coughs. He opened his mouth, and some black pieces of internal organs mixed with blood spurted out from within. Thanks to his protection, Chona, who was behind him, did not suffer any injuries. She looked down at the internal organs and black blood that Alf spat out, and her face darkened. She looked forward. Over there, a dozen steps away, was Heath, who had just disappeared and reappeared. She suddenly asked, "What's your name?" Heath said, "You're not qualified to know." Chona nodded. "Little wizard, I'll remember you. Today's matter won't end like this." After saying that, she turned to Fatty beside her and said, "Let's go, Alf." Alf was already so injured that he could no longer continue fighting. The opposing wizard was clearly still at ease. Even if they continued fighting, it would be difficult for them to have another chance to complete their mission. They could only leave this place first before making any plans. Hearing Laticona's words, the knights around them all heaved a sigh of relief. Two dark wizards had appeared all of a sudden. This had far exceeded the limits of their abilities. Many of them had thought that they were going to die here. Now that they had heard that they were going to leave, the knights present felt as if they had survived a calamity. Without the need for the dark wizards to speak, the knights spread out on both sides while maintaining their vigilance. They stared at the two of them as if they were sending off a plague, hoping that they would leave as soon as possible. However, they wanted to leave, but one of them did not agree. Heath said coldly, "You want to leave?" He raised Red Demon and said coldly, "Have you asked for my opinion?" Chapter 228, Kill. Form a formation, form a formation. Draw your swords. Prepare for battle. Draw your swords. A cold command rang out. After finding Heath, the main pillar of support, the knights quickly regained their fighting strength. They drew their swords and spread out to surround the two dark wizards. Chona narrowed her eyes and scanned the surroundings. She snorted, "You think you can keep us here?" After saying that, she raised her hands abruptly. Hwalala! A clear sound rang out. Thorny vines quickly grew out from the fingertips of Laticona's hands and quickly spread to the surroundings, entangling the surrounding knights. The knights brandished their swords to resist. However, her thorny vines were extraordinarily tough. The sharp cross-shaped sword did not have any effect on them at all. Instead, they were all entangled by the vines. Seeing that Chona had already opened up a path among the knights. However, at this moment, bang! A soft sound rang out. A ball of flame ignited on the vine and quickly spread towards Laticona's direction. Lautichona frowned and suddenly opened her mouth. Her mouth was originally not big, but at this moment, her upper and lower jaws were pulled open at an incredible width. Even her cheeks were split open, looking extremely terrifying. Squeak squeak squeak. A strange sound was heard. Large amounts of black bugs flew out from Laticona's split mouth and quickly flew towards the burning vines. These bugs were very strange. They did not fear the burning flames at all. Instead, they opened their mouths and bit by bit, ate the flames. Seeing this scene, Heath could not help but suppress his voice. Flame-devouring bugs. Flame-devouring bugs, as its name implied, was a type of bug that fed on flames. It was an elemental species under the category of magic bugs. It was a very rare type of magic bug. The flames on the vines were quickly eaten clean, and the original flames were extinguished. Lautichona immediately pulled the long vines and swept them to the side, sending the knight in front of her flying. Then, she grabbed Alf and was about to leave, but at that moment, clang! The cold sound of metal interweaving exploded. Seeing this, Heath did not hold back anymore. He raised Red Demon in his hand and charged towards Lautichona. Sword wind. Hula! Thousands of wind blades appeared around Heath, like warriors who were ready to listen to orders. The momentum was extremely terrifying. Lautichona was shocked. Rule-type spell. The elemental fluctuations of a rule-type spell were extremely unique. Once a wizard cast such a spell, it would be difficult for others to not notice it. Startled, Lautichona quickly waved her hands. With a loud crash, the thorny vines in her hands rose up and interweaved into layers of vine nets in front of her. At the same time, Heath, who was holding Red Demon in his hand, slashed out with his sword. The surrounding thousands of wind blades also moved along with his movements, like an army of thousands of horses charging forward, directly shooting towards Lautichona and Alf. Ka! 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 A series of crisp sounds rang out, and thousands of wind blades slashed at Laticona's thorny vines. No matter how tough these thorny vines were, they would not be able to withstand such dense wind blades. In an instant, debris flew everywhere and broke into pieces. The toppled vine net that Lautichona had pulled up with all her strength could not withstand a single blow from the wind blades that filled the sky. It was only able to block a portion of the wind blades before it was sliced into pieces. The remaining wind blades continued to slash forward without any hindrance, charging straight at Lautichona. Laticona's expression changed, and she hurriedly shouted, "Alf!" Alf, who was on the ground, still had an unsightly expression because of the shadow that he had devoured earlier. The large amount of black blood in front of him indicated his current state. However, after hearing Laticona's command, he still hurriedly got up and opened his mouth wide, trying to swallow Heath's wind blades. However, he had obviously overestimated his current state. After the wind blades slashed through his internal organs, a series of muffled dong 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 sounds could be heard. Alf's body swelled up one big lump after another. After doing this several times, the wind blades finally cut through Alf's body and continued to pounce towards Lautichona. Pu! 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 A series of crisp sounds could be heard. Dozens of wind blades interweaved into a net and slashed onto Laticona's body, then pierced through her body and pounced backward. Lautichona, who was retreating, suddenly stiffened. She stared at Heath, her eyes filled with surprise. After a while, she said, "Little wizard, I will remember you. Sooner or later, we will meet again." At this point, lines of blood suddenly appeared on her body. Then, with a crash, she broke into pieces like a collapsed building block. However, not long after the pieces broke, they quickly melted like burning black candles and turned into a pool of black water. "Is she dead? Is she dead? Is she dead? This black water is..." Seeing this strange scene, the knights surrounded them. Heath said, "Get out of the way. There might be a curse on these things. Don't touch them." "Ah! Curse!" The knights were shocked and did not dare to come forward again. Heath looked at the blood in front of him and frowned slightly. Did she escape? Many wizards had some strange life-saving methods, such as his substitute doll. The witch might have used some unknown method. Is it the black water? What is this black water? He walked up and took out a test tube. He took some of the black water and analyzed it when he had time in the future. When he took it out, he also used the system to take a look. Unfortunately, the reply he received was that the substance could not be extracted. Only the dead could be extracted, so he could not be sure if the witch had escaped. She's not very capable, but her ability to escape is not small. While he was complaining in his heart, Heath turned his head and looked at the fatty next to him. The fatty's physique was extremely shocking. After taking several of his spells and even a gust of wind from his sword, he was still alive. However, he had basically lost his fighting strength and was only left with one breath. Should I kill him to extract it? Or keep it for now? After thinking for a while, Heath chose the latter. He took out a magic potion from his dimensional pocket and fed it to the fatty. This was a magic potion that interfered with his mind power. Once a wizard drank it, his mind power would fall into a deep sleep. The magic power in his entire body would also be unable to be used due to the interference. Throw him into my tent. The attack today was very baffling. Since there was a survivor, he naturally asked if he could get a reason. In addition, he was also very curious about the fatty's physique. He pulled him back to do a few experiments to see if he could extract anything valuable from the fatty's body. After all, it wouldn't be too late to kill the extraction attribute after the experiment was over, right? Chapter 229, After the Battle. After the battle ended, Heath immediately interrogated the fatty. Unfortunately, the fatty's soul seemed to have already been moved, and his mental state wasn't too clear. Heath interrogated for a long time, but he still couldn't come up with a reason. In the end, he bluntly extracted the fatty's soul and stuffed it into a bottle. Later, he would hand it over to the fortress and let the fortress decide. As for the rest of the fatty's body, of course. Extract. Beep, extraction successful. Spiritual power plus 0.3. Beep, extraction successful. Spiritual force plus 16. Beep, extraction successful. Soul mutation plus 1286. Beep, extraction successful. Obtain soul fragment. Beep, extraction successful. The great tonic of the wizard level was indeed different. There were more than 10 items extracted, including attributes, spiritual force, soul fragments, spells, and so on. Among them, Heath also found something interesting. Spell appetite. This spell was the spell that Fatty had used in battle. It was an official level spell, and even among official level spells, its strength was extremely low. It was already close to a second-tier spell. The knowledge used in it was related to body modification, and it was already considered to be intermediate and high-level wizard knowledge. For a spell lover, it was a pity that such an attractive spell was placed in front of him, but Heath was not prepared to modify his body. So after thinking for a while, he came up with a compromise. Soul Servant. There were many servant-type spells in the wizard world. Create a servant that was connected to the soul, then modify the body of the servant and study the body modification type of spells. Not only for this appetite, Heath had also accumulated a lot of body transformation spells over the years, but these spells were basically very harmful to the body. Therefore, he had always stored them in his mind and never learned them. This time, after creating the soul servant, he could use these spells as well. But these were all for later. Now, he still had some things to deal with. First was Viscount Carson. Although Viscount Carson had been killed, the other party was, after all, the nominal commander of this camp. He still had to take care of the aftermath. Originally, Heath had planned to kill him first and then use a spell to create an illusion that he was courting death before dying. For example, he would transform into Viscount Carson and go out to fight the Wraiths. However, the attack of the Dark Wizards was very coincidental. Heath simply pushed the blame of Viscount Carson's death onto the Dark Wizards. Viscount Carson was dealt with, and then it was Winston who was behind him. Heath's idea was to kill this arrogant guy once and for all. However, this was not realistic and the difficulty was too high. After thinking for a while, he decided to let Wizard Robert handle this. He wrote a letter and gave the whole story to Commander Robert. Besides the letter, there were also the souls of the knights who attacked him. With these people and evidence, based on Wizard Robert's temper, he believed that even if the Partridge family was behind Winston, they would not be able to live in peace. After he packed up these chores and brought them to the fortress with the raven, the matter was basically over and he could concentrate on his magic. However, just as Heath was about to enter the magic field, a guest suddenly came to his door. Valley of the Dead, Camp, Night. That night, Heath was meditating in the tent. "Sir Wizard, are you asleep?" Suddenly, a crisp female voice sounded outside the tent. Although they hadn't met each other many times, Heath still recognized the owner of this voice. The elf princess. Heath had always felt that this elf princess was a bit strange, so he didn't really want to interact with her. However, he was very interested in the primordial spell she mentioned last time. While Heath was hesitating, Irina had already opened the curtain and walked in. Seeing this, Heath quickly stood up and bowed, "Your Highness." Irina said, "It's already so late. Are you still meditating?" Heath nodded, "Yes." Irina smiled, "No wonder you can have the strength of an official rank wizard at such a young age. Your hard work and perseverance are really extraordinary." Heath said, "Thank you." Then, Heath seemed to have thought of something and asked, "Oh right, since your Highness is here, there is something you want to ask your Highness." Irina said, "Please go ahead." Heath asked, "Do you know the few dark wizards who attacked the camp yesterday, your Highness?" Irina was stunned. "Dark wizards?" She shook her head and said, "No." Heath touched his chin. "I see." Irina asked, "What's wrong?" Heath shook his head. "No, it's nothing." Although there were dark wizards in the bloody battlefield, it was rare for dark wizards to take the initiative to attack them. Now that Heath had encountered them twice on this trip, he felt that it was probably not a coincidence. After thinking about it, he felt that the difference between him and the other camps was that he had brought this elven princess with him. However, the other party did not have any clues at the moment, so he could only put this guess aside for now. After a pause, he asked, "Your Highness, why did you come here so late at night?" Irina smiled and suddenly teased, "A woman came to a man's room late at night. What do you think she came here for?" Heath coughed dryly. "Ahem, your Highness is joking." Irina said with a strange expression, "Don't you humans like this kind of activity? Moreover, the more beautiful and exquisite a woman is, the easier it is for her to arouse your desire. Why? Aren't you all like this?" At this point, she said to herself, "I heard that human reproduction is a very comfortable thing. I really want to give it a try." Elves and humans had different physiological structures. Their reproduction method also relied on the tree of life, so the elves could not understand human sexual desire. Heath changed the topic and said, "Your Highness did not come here late at night to look for these messy things, right?" After a pause, he took the initiative and said, "I remember that your Highness mentioned the primordial spell to me last time. Why don't we talk about this topic?" Seeing that Heath was not interested, Irina did not continue the previous topic. She nodded and said, "I do have some clues about the primordial spell." After a pause, she suddenly asked, "Have you heard of the Library of Dawn?" Chapter 230, Princess. The Library of Dawn. Heath thought for a moment and suddenly thought of something. He asked doubtfully, "Do you mean the Dawn Tower?" Irina nodded. "Yes." After a pause, she explained in detail, "The current Dawn Tower used to be the Gathering of Dawn. In the library of the Dawn Tower, there are books about the primordial spells." Heath looked at Irina with a strange expression, not understanding what she was talking about. It was not a secret that the library of the Dawn Tower contained primordial spells. After all, it was one of the highest-level wizard organizations in the world. It was not strange that they had such ancient knowledge. But what was the use of knowing? These were all the secrets of the Dawn Tower's own property, and they were not open to outsiders. Ordinary people would not have a chance to get their hands on them, or... Irina's next words confirmed Heath's guess. She suddenly said, "Let me be frank. I don't know if you are interested in the Dawn Tower. If you have such thoughts, I can provide you with an opportunity to enter the Dawn Tower to study." Heath's eyes lit up. This was one of the top wizard organizations in the world. The knowledge and resources they held were the best in the world. Once a wizard joined them, they would definitely walk on a broad path. He asked, "Is what your Highness said true?" As far as he knew, the Dawn Tower seemed to adopt a traditional recommendation system for the recruitment of apprentices. It basically did not recruit apprentices to the outside world. It was impossible for ordinary wizards to join. Irina confirmed, "It's true." Heath observed Irina's expression for a while and confirmed that she was not joking. Irina said, "Let me tell you this. The Dawn Tower will recruit some apprentices every once in a while, but this kind of recruitment is mainly a recommendation system. Our Moon Elf royal family just happens to have some recommendation quotas. If you are interested, I can help you apply for this recommendation quota." After a pause, She added, however, the recommended apprentice must be outstanding enough. One of the conditions is to become an official wizard before the age of 30. Heath suddenly understood. No wonder he was found. So she was waiting for him here. For an existence like the Elven royal family, it was not difficult to find an official wizard, but it was not easy to find one under the age of 30. Obviously, this was the reason why the Elven princess had been so enthusiastic to him these days. Heath thought for a moment and asked, "What price do I have to pay?" "An equal exchange, a wizard with professional ethics." Irina nodded in satisfaction and said, "I hope you can help me find some information after you join the Dawn Tower. Don't worry, this information is not illegal and won't bring trouble to you." After a pause, she generously opened a bit of cloth on her chest, revealing the snow white underneath. The corners of her mouth curved like a crescent moon. "If you agree to my request, I can personally give you some gifts." Heath said speechlessly, "Compared to ordinary elves, Her Highness is really different." Most elves were elegant and proud, and their way of reproduction did not require piston movement like humans did. Therefore, most elves did not have the desire to do this, and even hated this kind of behavior. They felt that this was a kind of filth. Irina said matter-of-factly, "I am not an ordinary elf to begin with." She took a step forward and moved closer to Heath. "I have browsed through books on this subject in your human library, and the description on it is very interesting to me. How about it? Shall we try it?" "Ha! Ha! Do you have to be so proactive?" Heath took a step back. "Your Highness, you really like to joke." Irina pouted. "Do you think this is a joke? I'm just purely curious, just like you wizards are curious about magic. Can't I satisfy my curiosity?" Heath covered his forehead. "Your Highness, are you serious?" Irina said, "If you're afraid of causing trouble, you don't have to. We elves are relatively free. What kind of elf we are is our own choice. The elves won't restrict us." At this point, it would be too unmanly of him to just retreat. The next day, early morning. The early morning sun shone through the sheepskin tent and lit up the tent. On the simple bed made of straw mats, two figures hugged each other and slept. When the sun shone down, the two people on the bed woke up one after another. Yawn. Sitting up, Heath yawned. This princess was curious about him, and Heath agreed to be curious about strange creatures like elves. Thus, last night, both sides had been studying the splitting behavior of foreign life forms many times, so they worked a little late. Beside them, Irina also woke up. According to normal lovers, this was the time to say something and have some intimate interactions. However, the relationship between the two was not that close. Basically, they even deliberately called it the relationship between the subject and the ruler. So after holding it in for a long time, Heath only said a simple greeting. "Good morning, Your Highness." Irina tidied up her hair to expose her pointy ears. The ears of elves were a very sensitive part of them, and every elf needed to spend a lot of time grooming their ears every day. She also yawned. "Good morning." Probably because the weather was a little stuffy, as she spoke, she lifted the blanket covering her body, revealing her flawless and snow-white body underneath. Although both of them had already understood each other during the research process last night, when he saw this experimental material, Heath still couldn't help but have the idea to study it again. After all, it was really too exquisite. Thinking of the tiring night of the research experiment last night, Heath's heart was filled with an obsession and enthusiasm for research, and his body became restless. Irina, who was beside him, immediately noticed the change. Her nose twitched like a curious baby. She stared at it for a while and then said, "What? Wasn't it enough?" Heath pulled her over and stretched out his hand to make some preliminary adjustments to the experimental materials. He asked, "How is Your Highness' research going?" Irina said, "It's not bad. It's not as interesting as described in your human books. Compared to this, I think a beautiful piece of music is more interesting." At this point, she changed the topic and said, "But after all, I was the one who provoked you. If you need to release it, I don't mind." Heath laughed and said, "Haha, then I will be disrespectful." Chapter 231, Potion. Bloody Battlefield, Dark Cave. A group of believers of the Church of Truth was gathered in the hall, discussing the attack on the bloody fortress. "Lars, there have been enough wraiths gathered in the dark swamp recently. Let them revive. Gather the group of red scorched earth and push them toward the bloody fortress." The 13th title day is about to arrive. How are Lottie Chona and the others? The Church of Truth's deacon, Prince Bloodbat, asked the dark wizard in front of him. A dark wizard went forward and asked, "There's no news from mules for the time being. Lottie Chona sent a letter the day before yesterday and it has arrived at the Valley of the Dead. She should have succeeded by now." Hwalala. At this moment, a voice sounded. Immediately, a ball of purple smoke flew into the hall. The dark wizard said, "She's back." This was the flying spell that Lottie Chona often used. The purple smoke passed through a long passage and soon landed in the hall. The smoke twisted and turned into a human figure. It was Lottie Chona. However, Lottie Chona, who had just appeared, staggered and fell forward. The dark wizards in the hall looked at each other. Prince Bloodbat quickly walked forward. "What happened? Lottie Chona, where's Elf? Why didn't he come back with you?" Lottie Chona panted heavily for a while, then struggled to stand up. She gritted her teeth. "I failed. Elf was left behind." "What?" The dark wizards were shocked. Prince Bloodbat frowned. "There are high-level wizards stationed in the Valley of the Dead? Could it be the great elves sent by the elves?" Lottie Chona shook her head. "No. It's a wizard that I've never seen before. He's not strong. He's just a low-level wizard, but he mastered a rule-type spell. Elf wasn't prepared, so he was left behind. I even used an egg of darkness. The egg of darkness was a kind of soul substitute material. After signing a contract with a wizard, when a wizard died, they could use the egg of darkness to be reborn." Everyone frowned. At this time, everyone noticed that there was still some cellular clothing left on Laticona's body. It was obvious that she had just recovered. "A beginner wizard? He's mastered a rule-type spell. Is that true? Is he a genius from some family?" Laticona's words immediately caused a stir among the dark wizards. A rule-type spell was definitely a powerful spell that every wizard yearned for. It could be said that it was the greatest pursuit of spells before the stigmata. At this time, a wizard suddenly said, "The last time, Mule's student was also stopped by a wizard, causing him to fail. I heard that his combat strength was also very outstanding. Could it be that it was the same person this time?" "Ah, I remember it too. There is such a thing. I heard that he is a knight." Everyone's eyes turned to Lottie Chona. Lottie Chona nodded. "The kid who stopped us also knows those human moves. I see. It seems that there is no mistake. It is a person." Prince Bloodbat's face became gloomy. "Quiet. The 13th title day is coming soon, and Anavis bloodline is still nowhere to be found. How much longer are you going to waste your time on this mess?" The crowd quieted down. Prince Bloodbat continued, "This matter must be dealt with immediately." Hwalala. At this moment, a crisp sound rang out. "Mules, Mules has returned." A ball of black smoke quickly flew in from outside the cave and quickly landed in the middle of the cave. The black smoke transformed into a human figure. It was Mules. After standing still, Mules immediately bowed and said, "Deacon." Prince Bloodbat raised his hand and hurriedly asked, "All right, Mules. Laticona's side has failed. How is it on your side? You won't disappoint me again, am I right?" Mules glanced at Lottie Chona, his tone full of contempt. "Ha, some people will fail too." Lottie Chona snorted coldly and didn't say anything. Mules then took out a potion bottle from his dimensional pocket. The bottle contained bright red liquid. He handed the bottle over and said, Mules, never disappoint." Prince Bloodbat took the bottle and said, "Ha ha ha, good. This time, I want to see what else the bloody fortress can do to stop the tide of wraiths." 2 weeks later, in the bloody battlefield, in the Valley of the Dead, in Heath's laboratory tent. Gulp! 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 A clear sound rang out. Inside the black pot, colorful liquids were churning non-stop, and large patches of grayish-white smoke were gushing out. In front of the black pot, Heath was mixing all kinds of strange materials. On one side of the tent, there was a fat and strong figure. It was the dark wizard, Alf, who had been taken down by Heath. However, Alf's pupils had already dilated, and there were no elemental fluctuations on his body. It was obvious that he was no longer breathing. After bringing Alf back that day, Heath interrogated him for a while, but he couldn't get anything out of him. He extracted Alf's soul and sent it to the fortress with a raven. The rest of the body was used by Heath as experimental materials. A wizard-level corpse, and it was a body modification wizard. This was a rare material. Using this material, Heath completed a darkness spell that he had always wanted to try. Soul Servant. This was a very high-level darkness spell. It cut off a part of one's soul and put it into a specific material to make a servant that one could use at will. Heath had been very interested in this spell since a long time ago, but this spell had a very high requirement for soul power, so he had never tried it. Until recently, through continuous efforts, his soul mutation rate had reached 30%. After the soul mutation rate reached 30%, there were many things that could be done with the soul, and cutting off the soul was one of them. At this time, the Dark Wizard came to him, so he thought about it and decided to use the Dark Wizard's corpse to make his own soul servant. Ghost Grass 15G. Necromancer's Flowers 3. In the room, he threw various materials into the black pot in front of him. As he stirred the black pot, the liquid quickly changed. When the last material was put in, the liquid in the black pot finally stabilized. At this time, what was left in the pot was a pure black liquid, like melted black glue. Wah! 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 A strange sound rang out, like the cry of a child. The black glue-like liquid quickly twisted and changed, squirming like a worm on the pot. Heath took out a potion bottle and filled it with all the liquid. He tilted it gently, and a satisfied smile appeared on his face. It's done, Soul-Splitting Potion. Chapter 232, Soul. Soul-Splitting Potion, a kind of potion that worked on the soul. Through this potion, the soul could be extracted from the body temporarily, and then some experiments on the soul could be carried out, including cutting the soul and so on. Holding the potion, Heath came to the side and lay down on the ground. He first turned the ring on his hand and let out the spirit, Nina. In order to reduce the consumption of her soul, Nina usually stayed in the ring to sleep. She would only summon her when Heath needed her. What's the matter, Heath? A faint light flashed on the ring. A transparent shadow slowly flew out from the ring. The red dress that looked like blood looked gloomy. Heath said, I want to do some experiments on the soul. In a while, I'm going to take a soul-splitting potion. Then, you can help me guide me out of my body. It'll be easier this way. Nina said, okay. After Nina had settled the matter, Heath set up a magic barrier around the tent. In addition, he specially called Knight Aaron and the others to stand guard outside the tent. During the period when the soul left the body, the wizard himself could not be disturbed. Otherwise, the soul would be forcefully summoned back into the body. In addition, the wizard's soul might be injured. As long as we guard this place. Yes. Yes, my lord. I swear on my honor that even if a demon comes, he will not be able to step into the tent. After arranging everything, Heath immediately went to the bed next to the tent and sat down. He picked up the soul-splitting potion in his hand and shook it in front of his eyes. I hope this thing doesn't taste too bad. After saying that, he raised his head and drank the potion. How should he put it? The smell of carrots mixed with the aroma of rice split open in his mouth. The taste was not considered difficult to swallow, and there was even a rare bit of sweetness. Among the various strange potions he had drunk, it was considered one of the most outstanding ones. He could not help but smack his mouth. Hey! Suddenly, a strange feeling came from Heath's body. The touch on his body quickly disappeared bit by bit. Heath even felt that his soul was twisting and changing and separating from his body bit by bit. From the inside of the room, it could be clearly seen that Heath's body suddenly fell back, and a ball of strange smoke escaped from his body. The smoke twisted and changed in the air and quickly took the shape of Heath. The upper half of his soul had left his body, but the lower half of his soul was still in his body. At this time, he needed Nina's help. Nina flew over, grabbed Heath, and dragged him out of his body completely. Soon, a transparent Heath stood in the tent. Nina looked up and down at Heath, and couldn't help but ask curiously, why is your soul energy so strong? Did you eat any magic potion to strengthen your soul? Heath shook his head. No. Nina had a strange expression. It was impossible to separate the soul and body just by being a wizard. Even if it was forcibly separated by the magic potion, the body should not be like that. Heath could not help but explain, my soul mutation is almost 30%. What? Nina's eyes widened. Soul mutation was extremely difficult. It required a large amount of time and a large number of materials to accumulate bit by bit. Usually, only those powerful wizards who had reached the peak of the primary rank and were about to advance to the intermediate rank would reach this level. Heath was a low-rank wizard, but he had already raised his soul mutation rate to 30% in advance. This was truly unbelievable. You're really... After a while, Nina thought of an evaluation. Weird. Heath ignored Nina. He was focused on feeling the wonders of being a soul. How to put it, it was completely different from usual. There was still touch, breathing, and heartbeat on his body, but these 5 senses came from the body next to him. His own soul didn't feel anything at all. As if sensing that Heath was curious about his current state, Nina suddenly asked, "How is it? Do you want to go out for a walk?" Heath replied, "Of course." Before completing the soul splitting, a wizard had to master the control of the soul, including changing forms, transferring soul energy, and so on. In addition, it was rare to enter the soul-body state, so of course he had to feel it well to understand more about the soul. After all, the effects of the soul-splitting potion could last for a long time, which was more than enough time. Then, Heath and Nina walked out. The soul without a physical body easily passed through the tent and came to the outside of the tent. Outside the tent, Knight Aaron was guarding the door with a few knights. He did not feel Heath's arrival at all. Ordinary humans could not see through the naked eye in the soul-body state. However, the soul body had a cold attribute. When Heath approached, the knights could not help but feel a chill. One of the knights was caught off guard and said, "It's so cold. Why did the temperature suddenly drop?" "Ah? Did you feel it too? I thought it was an illusion." The knights were confused. Heath and Nina continued to move forward and soon arrived outside the tent. Nina said, "You can try flying. Now you are no longer bound by gravity." Heath nodded and tried to control his body to fly up. As if by instinct, he easily flew up into the air. It was similar to flying, but the feeling was completely different from flying. To be more specific, it was like playing a VR game, as if he had entered a virtual space. "Let's go, let's take a walk in the forest." Under Nina's invitation, Heath and Nina flew all the way into the depths of the forest, shuttling through the forest. Swamps, wetlands, valleys, and lakes. Scenes were changing rapidly in front of their eyes. Souls that had lost their physical bodies shuttled quickly through the forest. Heath was also looking at the scenes in the forest. After a while, they arrived in front of a lake and dived into the depths of the lake through the thick water surface. The seemingly calm surface of the lake was bustling with activity. All kinds of fish were swimming among the swaying aquatic plants, and beautiful gemstones were shining under the sunlight that penetrated the surface of the lake. After a while, he and Nina flew high into the sky and sat on the clouds, overlooking the land below. He looked at the various creatures on the land that were like ants, the forest that swayed with the wind like a green ocean, and the flowers, plants, and trees in the world. He controlled his soul to fly, jump, and run. He controlled his soul to change into clusters of smoke and then twist into various forms, making his soul change back and forth. During this process, he seemed to have comprehended some knowledge that he did not understand before. It was about the soul. This was a deeper understanding and exploration of the soul. So that's how it is. Is this the essence of the soul? Such a harvest surprised Heath. Although it did not bring him any improvement in his strength, it allowed him to understand more about the structure of the soul. It was extremely useful for him to improve his soul in the future. After staying outside for a while, he was almost done with his practice. Only then did Heath bring Nina back to the tent. Then, Heath began the day's work. Soul Cutting. Chapter 233, Clone. Standing in the middle of the tent, Heath raised his right hand with his palm facing upwards. His 5 fingers were bent into claws. After getting into a good position, he began to try to mobilize the soul energy in his body. With the long practice outside, he now had a basic grasp of the use of the soul. Without much trouble, the soul energy was gathered by him. A light blue energy body rose from his palm, like a burning flame. However, this energy body was connected to his palm, and it seemed to be a part of his body. Heath raised his left hand, and with a thought, his palm transformed into a dagger. He held the dagger and stabbed at the energy body in his palm, starting to cut the energy body. After a while, Ziza! A soft sound rang out. The space in the tent rippled at this moment. It was caused by the eruption of soul energy. After this layer of ripple passed, the energy object in Heath's palm had already separated from his palm. It slowly transformed into a ball in his palm. This ball of energy was the soul that Heath had cut off. Phew! After losing, Heath calmed himself down. His expression seemed to be a little uncomfortable. Soul cutting was not a simple matter. It was equivalent to cutting off a part of a body. This was very harmful to the wizard himself. At this moment, Heath clearly felt that his soul power had decreased a little. After resting for a while, he came before Fatty's corpse and sent the soul energy body in his hand towards Alf's corpse. The incorporeal soul energy was just like how it had passed through the tent before, entering Fatty's body and quickly spreading towards Fatty's surroundings. After waiting on the spot for 2 seconds. Plop! Plop! A vigorous heartbeat suddenly sounded. Alf's ice-cold corpse actually came to life at this moment. His heart began to beat, and his stiff and ice-cold skin gradually recovered. Not long after, Alf opened his eyes. His enormous body sat up from the bed. However, his eyes were not as dull and blank as before. Instead, they became more shrewd. His eyeballs kept rolling around, as if he was a different person. He raised his large hands and looked around, muttering to himself, "So that's how it is. Is this a soul servant?" This voice and tone obviously did not belong to the fatty who only knew how to eat. It belonged to Heath. A soul servant made by soul cutting was more like a wizard's clone than an ordinary servant. By cutting off a part of the wizard's soul and injecting it into a new corpse, the wizard could gain complete control over the body through his own soul. It could be said that the wizard had been reborn. This was equivalent to having a clone of the wizard himself. Moreover, this body had its own life force and was an independent main body of the soul. It was equivalent to an independent individual. Even if Heath himself died, he could use this body to be reborn, which was equivalent to having an additional life. I wonder if the system can be shared? Since the system is bound to the soul, it should also be possible, right? As he guessed in his heart, Heath called out in his heart, "System. Beep, supernatural extraction system, waiting for host's summon." It really could be done. The familiar blue virtual projection screen unfolded in front of Heath's eyes, with various data listed on it. Strength 86, Agility 72, Vitality 108, Spiritual Force 162, Vitality 6. The attributes of the three measurements were not much different from what Heath had guessed before. They were all around 100, and Spiritual Force 162. It was probably the same as him, almost an intermediate stage wizard. It was this vitality. 6 points. That's too little. There was nothing he could do about it. The soul and vitality were closely related. The vitality of this body had disappeared along with the death of the main body's soul. The reason why it was able to recover was because of the little soul Heath had cut off. The prerequisite for Heath to perform the soul cutting was that it could not affect the main body, so the soul energy cut off was naturally very rare. It was already good enough to have 6 points. Forget it, I'll slowly increase it. Shaking his head, Heath did not take this to heart. With the system, the materials, and the rich experience from before, it was not too difficult for him to increase his vitality. He could just slowly extract it in the future. Following that, Heath closed his eyes and checked his spiritual C. An independent clone naturally also had an independent spiritual C, but it was different from his main body's spiritual C. This body had undergone many body modifications, including changes to the spiritual C, changing it into a spell template that was more suitable for body strengthening. It was basically difficult to learn regular spells with this template. It seems that this body can only focus on the path of body modification in the future. Heath quickly came to a conclusion. This wasn't a bad thing. After all, he wanted to revive this body to do research on body modification, and it was inevitable for him to give up on learning conventional spells if he wanted to further modify his body. In any case, his original body was more than enough to learn conventional spells. Since this body couldn't learn conventional spells, he didn't have to learn them. Heath's original body walked over and circled around the fat Heath twice, carefully sizing it up. Not bad, not bad. Although this body had undergone many body modifications, the modifications were all in terms of strengthening the nucleus of the cells. In terms of appearance, other than the slightly larger mouth, the other parts were no different from ordinary people. Even the facial features were above average. A round, fat face, thick eyebrows, and large eyes. Below it was a large mouth. It looked a little silly, with a charmingly naive appearance. It could not be considered handsome, but it was very cute. A perfect physique body. From now on, this body will be specialized in body modifications. Heath silently decided in his heart. After completing the creation of the soul-cutting and soul-servant, Heath's life immediately returned to the normal path. During the day, he carried his great sword and went out to explore and extract materials. With the addition of the fatty's clone, Heath's extraction efficiency once again had a qualitative leap, increasing by a whole fold. After all, in the past, he was the only one searching for materials to extract. Now that there was a fatty's clone, the fatty's identity could also use the system and be able to extract materials. Naturally, the efficiency increased in an instant. It would be great if I could have more clones. After feeling the double increase in efficiency for a few days, Heath could not help but feel a little greedy. Unfortunately, his greed could only be thought about in his heart for the time being. This clone was made with his soul as the main body. The prerequisite for creating a clone was that his soul energy needed to be strong enough. With his current soul mutation rate of less than 30%, it was already the limit for him to make a clone with one cut. If he wanted to make another cut, he would need to advance to an intermediate wizard or above. Moreover, even if he advanced to an intermediate wizard, it was still extremely difficult for him to complete the cut. The difficulty of the first cut and the second cut of the soul were two completely different things. Just like that, every day, he would extract during the day, come back at night to train, carry out body experiments every few days to increase the fatty's vitality, and so on. Every day, he lived a busy and fulfilling life. During this process, Heath's strength was also increasing day by day. This continued for a few months, and Heath's soul mutation rate smoothly reached 30%. At this point, one of the basic conditions for becoming an intermediate wizard had been successfully achieved. Not long after his soul mutation rate reached 30%, the fortress arranged for a raven to send him a letter. With the arrival of this letter, Heath's regular life changed once again. Chapter 234, Return. 3 months later, at the sealed land, Bloody Fortress. Squeak! Squeak! The sound of wheels rolling could be heard as a carriage slowly drove into the tall gates of the fortress. The carriage was surrounded by a circle of guards, including human knights and dwarven warriors. There was even a small flag on the carriage. The patterns on the flag explained the origins of the carriage. It had come from the Valley of the Dead Souls. Sam, who was carrying an axe on his back, looked up at the towering city wall and the giant trees behind the wall. He could not help but sigh, "Oh! I'm finally back." At the same time, Knight Aaron rode his horse to the side of the carriage. Knock, knock, knock. He knocked on the door. "Sir, we're here." The curtain of the carriage was lifted by a slender and fair hand, and a handsome face appeared in front of the window. Heath raised his head to look at this familiar environment and nodded. "Okay, I got it." With Robert's return, the issue of the source of troops had basically been resolved. Therefore, after making the necessary arrangements, Robert sent a letter to send Heath back to the fortress in the Valley of the Dead. The carriage drove all the way to the gate and soon arrived at the square. At this moment, an elf riding a horse in front of them quickly came over. The elf on the horse was none other than Palandy, who had a brief encounter with Heath. When he came close, the elf, Palandy, jumped off the white horse and greeted the dwarf, Sam, who was familiar with him. "Sam, welcome back." Sam laughed and said, pointy-eared, "You actually haven't died in battle? Your luck is really good." Palandy then came to the front of the carriage and bowed to Heath. "Sir Wizard, I am here under the orders of Commander Robert. He is waiting for you in the office." The accompanying guards could not help but glance at Heath. He had just returned and was summoned by Commander Robert. From this, it could be seen how important Heath was to Robert. Heath nodded. "I understand." The carriage drove all the way inside and finally stopped in front of the dormitory. Heath first went to the dormitory to change his clothes and then went to Robert's office. Knock, knock, knock. The door was knocked. Robert, who was arranging the documents in front of his desk, looked up. When he saw Heath standing at the door, a smile appeared on his face. He stood up and walked over. "Welcome. Welcome back, Wizard Heath." Heath entered the door and bowed. "Commander." Robert patted his shoulder. "All right, don't be so formal. Come and sit." Heath and Robert sat down on the sofa in the reception area. Then, they arranged for a servant to send over some drinks and snacks. Robert pointed at the red liquid in the oak cup and said politely, "The old witch's red soup. I don't know if it's to your liking." Heath was slightly surprised. The old witch's red soup. This was actually a very famous drink for wizards in the wizard world. Its effect was similar to the soul-washing wine, which could also increase spiritual power. However, compared to the soul-washing wine, the old witch's red soup had a higher elemental content and was purer. It was worth mentioning that its creator was a very famous old witch in the wizard world. The name of the old witch's red soup also came from this. Heath picked up the red soup and took a sip. As soon as the liquid entered his mouth, Heath felt that the soup seemed to have turned into little people, jumping out of his mouth and rolling down his throat. At the same time, pure magical energy surged in his body and quickly spread to his spiritual sea. Soon, Heath felt a very comfortable feeling coming from his spiritual sea. It was as if he had just slept. He looked at it through the system. In just a short while, his spiritual power had risen by 0.5 points. If it was normal training, it would take him at least 1 or 2 months to increase it. After thinking about it for a long time, Heath put down the red soup and said honestly, it lives up to its reputation. After a pause, he said gratefully, "Thank you, Commander." The old witch's red soup was a very high-grade drink. Many of the ingredients used in it were scarce and basically did not circulate in the market. Hence, this kind of red soup was only circulated among the extremely high-grade wizard community. Robert shook his head. Compared to what Wizard Heath paid for the fortress, it's just a little drink. It's not worth mentioning. If you like it, I'll get someone to send you some later. Heath shook his head. There's no need for that. The old witch's red soup brought about an increase in spiritual power that was only effective the first time he drank it. After that, it only had the effect of restoring spiritual power. Robert said, "It's okay." Then, he did not continue on this topic. He changed the topic and said, "This time, I asked you to come because of 2 things. Heath focused his attention. Speaking up to this point, Robert hesitated for a moment before angrily saying, "I'm very sorry about the matter with the Partridge family. No one would have thought that they would actually nurture such scum. I've already reported this matter to the tower. Winston has also returned. I've also warned them. This is what they asked me to give you. Consider it an apology for this matter." As he spoke, he handed over a magic stone pocket. Heath opened the pocket and took a look. There were 100 magic stones inside, and all of them were high-grade magic stones, which was 1 million magic stones. Seeing this, Heath stared with his eyes wide open. Good guy, they immediately gave out 1 million magic stones. Was this the trump card of a high-grade wizard family? Robert continued, "It's inevitable that rats and cockroaches will appear in a clean castle. This matter will end here. What do you think?" Heath nodded. Yes. The gap between his current energy and a behemoth like Partridge was still too big. Now that Robert had stepped in to mediate, it was natural for him to go down the stairs. Otherwise, if he continued to press on, he would only be asking for trouble. As for what would happen in the future, that would depend on how he could reach that level in the future. Seeing Heath accept it so readily, Robert was slightly relieved. This matter, right and wrong were very obvious. But Heath was only an ordinary wizard after all, and Partridge was there. If Heath insisted on being serious, even he wouldn't have a good idea. Robert continued, "In addition, your achievements in the Valley of the Dead during this period of time have been witnessed by everyone. I've discussed with the generals of the Round Table Conference, and after that, I'll give you another reward at the Commendation Assembly. The fortress will remember what you've done." Heath said humbly, "You're too polite. I'm also a member of the fortress." Pausing for a moment, he asked, "Also, have you found any clues about the Dark Wizards? I have a feeling that their motive for attacking the Valley of the Dead is not simple." Robert said, "Don't worry, I'll make arrangements. Those dirty tricks of those black rats won't cause much trouble." Heath glanced at Robert and saw that he was confident, so he did not ask any more questions. Robert continued, "I've asked you to come here today to discuss something with you." Heath said, "Please go ahead." Robert said, "Your garrison period is over. According to the procedure, you can choose to leave the bloody fortress now. Of course, you can also choose to stay. If you choose the latter, in addition to the daily cultivation resources, we will give you an additional subsidy. I want to hear your thoughts." Chapter 235, Decision. The time was already up? Heath was stunned. It was mainly because he had been living comfortably during this period of time. He had not experienced the cruelty and oppression that war should have been. On the contrary, every day, he was full of ambition because he had gained something from the extraction of the materials. He could not feel the time at all. Counting the time, it had indeed been more than a year since he came here. According to the service period of wizards, it was usually only 1 or 2 years. Seeing Heath's hesitation, Robert could not help but ask, "Why? Didn't you think about it before?" Heath nodded. "It's a bit sudden." Robert laughed. "Ha ha ha, after so many years in the bloody battlefield, which one of us didn't count our days here? You're the first one who didn't even remember when your service period was up." Heath shrugged. "I guess I'm just a bit too big-hearted." Robert nodded. "You're indeed different from ordinary warriors." After a pause, he continued, "In that case, there's no need to rush to give me an answer. You can go back and think about it. In addition, if you choose to leave, I can provide you with an opportunity." Heath was puzzled. "Opportunity?" Robert nodded and suddenly asked, "Dawn Tower. Have you heard of this name?" Heath was stunned. "Yes, why?" Robert said, "I have a friend who is a wizard in Dawn Tower. One of his apprentices died not long ago. He is busy with things around him. He wants to find an outstanding apprentice. I think you are quite suitable." Heath's mouth twitched. It couldn't be that coincidental, right? What was this? The trajectory of fate? Robert saw the strange look on Heath's face and couldn't help but ask, "What is it?" Heath shook his head. "No, go on." Robert continued, "Being by my friend's side is also very good for you. You can easily get the answer from him for the confusion you face and the confusion you have about magic. He is a stigmata wizard." Heath's eyes lit up. "A stigmata wizard?" Robert nodded. "That's right. So, I think this is a rare opportunity. You can consider it carefully." Heath said seriously, "Okay, I will definitely consider it carefully." There was no need to say anything more about stigmata wizards. Stigmata wizards themselves were a collection of knowledge. To be able to reach this level of knowledge, one's own knowledge level could definitely be described as massive. There was no need to say how much benefit it would bring to be by the side of someone at this level. Robert patted Heath's shoulder. "In that case, you can go back first. When you have an answer, you can reply to me." "Yes." Then, Heath stood up and walked out. But before he left the office, Robert suddenly stopped him. "Oh, right." Robert walked up and said, "Although my friend needs to recruit his own apprentice, according to the rules of the Dawn Tower, his apprentices can only be selected from within the tower. In other words, if you want to become my friend's apprentice, you must first join Dawn Tower. Dawn Tower will recruit a batch of apprentices every once in a while, using the traditional recommendation system. I happen to have a recommendation slot here, and I will help recommend you. This batch of apprentices will be recruited soon, at the latest, it will be more than 10 years. If you want to go, you should make preparations as soon as possible." For wizards, more than 10 years was indeed a very short time. Heath said, "Okay." He had learned about this from Irina, the elf princess, and it was not much different from what Robert said. After leaving Robert's office, Heath returned to his dormitory in the tower. "Wizard Heath, welcome back." "Haha, Wizard Heath, you're really back. Long time no see, Wizard Heath." Everyone he met on the way, whether he knew or not, greeted Heath warmly. Some of them were complimenting him because of Robert's leadership, but many of them were also because of his recognition and respect. The plan he had proposed at the round table meeting to change the defensive formation of the fortress had been carried out. In the subsequent tidal attacks, the casualty rate of the fortress warriors had significantly decreased. The entire fortress benefited from this. Looking at the friendly and warm smiling faces, Heath felt that it was not bad to stay in the fortress. With the substitute doll given by Witch Cassandra, he did not feel any pressure on this battlefield. It was also quite interesting to fight side by side with these warriors. He was popular, and held great power in his hands. It would not be an exaggeration to say that he could get whatever he wanted. Then, should he continue to stay here? After some consideration, Heath still rejected this idea. An apprentice of the Stigmata Wizard was a rare and precious opportunity. Heath was not willing to miss it. Moreover, he had already promised the elf princess before, so he had to fulfill his promise. The other main factor was still extraction. After this period of continuous extraction, he had basically swept through all the materials that could be extracted from the Valley of the Departed Souls. The material types that grew in the entire sealed land were all similar. It would be difficult to discover anything new if he continued to stay here. Extraction was the shortcut for him to quickly improve his strength. Since he had already swept through most of this place, there was naturally no need to stay here anymore. Thus, the next morning, Heath went to Robert and expressed his decision to retire. "Okay, I've approved it for you. Get ready. You can leave after the commendation assembly. There's an airship coming next week. You can take it. Also, you have to pay more attention to the Dawn Tower. The assessment is not easy. I'll send you the contents of the previous assessments in a while. You can refer to them. If you don't understand anything, ask a raven to send a message to me." After receiving Heath's reply, Robert quickly approved his retirement and made proper arrangements for him. "Also, these are what you deserve." Following that, Robert sent a few more items to Heath. They were a silver badge, a bag of high-grade magic stones, and a medal with a unique design. The silver badge was his military rank badge. It was something he had accumulated from killing dark wizards, helping the fortress change the warriors' battle formation, and defending the Valley of the Dead. In an instant, he was upgraded from 2 gemstones of bronze to silver rank. However, this badge was not only useful in the fortress. It was used in the entire Tower of Order and the entire West Coast. It was a symbol of status. With this silver badge, no matter where he went in the West Coast, he would be treated respectfully by a wizard master. He would even be treated as an equal. The other magic stone pocket contained 30 high-level magic stones. This was something that all retired warriors of the bloody battlefield had, and could be considered a retired military invitation of the bloody battlefield. The last badge was the same, and belonged to all retired warriors. "Ah, Wizard Heath, are you leaving? You just came back. Teacher, if you have time, you must come to the Kara family. Master Wizard, I owe you my life. Take this beard. No matter when, as long as you need it, you can get the help of any dwarf. Little friend Heath, when I have the chance, I will come back to visit you and discuss ice magic." Everyone expressed their reluctance after knowing that Heath was leaving. Martha invited Heath to the Kara family as a guest. Wizard Baxter agreed to pay him a visit later, while Dwarf Sam simply cut off a strand of beard and gave it to Heath. This was a tradition of the dwarves. It was the most precious gift to the most precious person. In addition to them, there was another guest who had to be mentioned the night before he left. The night before Heath left, Bloody Fortress, dormitory. Knock, knock, knock. There was a knock on the door. "Come in, Heath," who was packing his luggage, said without raising his head. The door opened with a click, and Irina, who was wearing a crescent-colored robe, walked into the room. Heath immediately stood up. "Long time no see, Your Highness." Irina had been transferred back to the fortress a month or two before Heath. After that, she had been arranged to go to the elf clan to deal with matters, so she had not seen Heath all this time. She had only just returned today. After knowing that Heath was leaving, the elf princess hurried over. Irina asked, "I heard that you are leaving." Heath nodded and smiled. "Yes, I'm taking the airship tomorrow morning." Irina frowned. "Why didn't you tell me?" Heath was stunned. Irina said matter-of-factly, "According to the relationship between you humans, shouldn't we be related to each other after having sex? Shouldn't you inform me if you are leaving?" Heath's lips twitched. "That sounds reasonable." Irina then waved her hand and said, "All right, let's not talk about this anymore. Do you still remember the agreement between us?" Heath nodded. "Of course." Only then did Irina's furrowed brows relax. She nodded and said, "All right, in that case, I have something here for you. Consider it as a gift for you leaving. Of course, you can also treat it as a token of our love." Heath's mouth twitched again. This elf princess. How should he put it? Her thoughts were very erratic. Irina walked forward, took out her dimensional pocket, and took out an item. Chapter 236, Market. West of the Dark Forest, Old Forest, Magic Tree Airport. Magic Tree Airport was a small airport on the west side of the Dark Forest. The airships that traveled to and from the Dark Forest would dock and resupply here. "Wizard, are you sure you want to get off here? This place is far from your destination." "It's okay, Knight Weruth. Just put me down here. Some of the materials I need grow here. I'll go and collect them. Then." "Okay, but you have to be careful. This is the dark forest. Got it. When the airship passed by the Magic Tree Airport, Heath got off the ship ahead of time. His soul mutation had already reached the standard of advancing to an intermediate wizard. Now, as long as his spiritual power reached the standard, he could make a breakthrough to an intermediate wizard. Some of the things he needed to prepare should also be put on the agenda. Although advancing to an intermediate wizard was not as difficult as advancing to a wizard from an apprentice, it still required some potions to assist. One of the most commonly used potions was called sublimation water. The most important thing for a beginner wizard to advance to an intermediate wizard was the sublimation of the soul. The function of this potion was to promote the sublimation of the wizard's soul, thus greatly increasing the success rate of a wizard's advancement. In this generation of the Old Forest, there were many materials for the preparation of sublimation water, so Heath decided to stay here for a short while and collect some. There are the freshest eyeballs in the entire west coast. Do you want eyeballs? The tail of a rat. The tail of a grey rat. Come and have a look. The newly arrived banshee has been tamed. She can do anything for you. The structure of the Magic Tree Airport was similar to most airports in the Dark Forest. The entire airport was built on a huge world tree. There were docks, streets, and houses. After getting down from the airport, there was a wizard market. The structure was similar to the mist market that Heath had been to. It was also a street with tree trunks. There were tree houses and street stalls on both sides. Dragon scale flower, a mature dragon scale flower. At this moment, a hawker attracted his attention. He swept his gaze and soon arrived in front of the stall. There was a carriage-like carriage parked on the stall. The large carriage shed was open, and there were all kinds of strange goods inside. A large glass container was filled with round eyeballs. On the nails on the door of the carriage hung the tail of a grey mouse that had been sunburned. Beside it was a naked girl. The red eyes indicated the identity of the girl, the forest banshee. The owner of the shop was an old witch with messy hair. When Heath came over, she immediately greeted him warmly. What do you want? Young wizard, the forest banshee that I just got is a very outstanding magical pet. How is it? Heath said, let me take a look first. There was a short wooden table on the floor of the carriage. On the table were all kinds of strange plants, flowers, and so on. Heath's gaze swept over it, and finally fell on a flower with a strange shape. It was a flower with 6 petals. The petals had strange patterns on them, and they looked like the scales of some kind of creature. There was a mouth on the stamen of the flower, and its sharp teeth looked very fierce. The flower seemed to be alive, and when Heath looked at it, it seemed to have sensed something. The mouth on the stamen suddenly opened, and it let out a muffled dragon's roar. Dragon scale flower. As its name suggested, this was a flower that looked like a giant dragon's scale. It was said to be a wonderful species born from the corpses of the ancient dragons. It had a trace of the life energy of the ancient dragons. Among the 9 great races, the giant dragons had the highest level of life energy. It was one of the most suitable materials to make the sublimation water. Heath asked, how much is this dragon scale flower? The old witch raised 2 fingers and announced a price from her mouth, 20 magic stones, high-grade magic stones. This price was not considered expensive. It could even be considered a bargain. One had to know that the market price of the dragon scale flower was usually 300,000 magic stones, which was 30 high-grade magic stones. Heath nodded. I'll take this dragon scale flower. In addition, I need to pick out some other materials. As he spoke, he picked out more than a dozen materials in succession. They were all needed to concoct the sublimation water. However, other than the dragon scale flower, the rest of the materials were not considered expensive. Add these up and calculate. After looking at Heath's materials, the old witch's eyes lit up, her attitude immediately became respectful. Rootless fruit. Nightcry flower. Flaming bird feathers. Ah, it's my honor to be able to serve you, my lord. These can be counted as 28 high-tier magic stones for you, my lord. The formula for the sublimation water was all public. Looking at these materials, the old witch could also guess Heath's usage of them. Heath nodded. Sure. As he paid, he silently guessed in his heart. This dragon scale flower looked fresh and obviously had just been plucked. If that was the case, there should be something that could be extracted, right? With such a guess in mind, he silently chanted in his heart, extract. Beep, extraction successful. Vitality increased. Beep, extraction successful. Spiritual power plus 0.1. Beep, extraction successful. As expected. After hearing the system's notification, Heath was delighted. He then used extraction on the other seemingly fresh materials. As expected, he had more or less obtained some attributes. The successive successes made Heath's heart skip a beat. He directly opened the system's remote extraction function. Immediately. Beep, extraction successful. Spiritual power increased. Beep, extraction successful. Spiritual power increased. Beep, extraction successful. Agility increased. Beep, extraction successful. Obtained. Immediately, a series of densely packed system notifications rang out. All the materials that could be extracted from this stall and the surrounding stalls were scanned and extracted by Heath. Haha. So many attributes. In the past, he had come to the market to wander around and try to extract attributes from other people's materials. However, the system at that time could only extract attributes through contact. It had to be manually filtered one by one, and its efficiency was low. It was also easy to arouse suspicion, so Heath usually did not dare to extract too many attributes. Now that the system had upgraded, it was much more convenient. There was no need to contact it. He only needed to give an order, and the surrounding materials were all filtered by the system. All the materials that could be extracted were automatically extracted, it was simply undetectable. In the future, I can go to the market more often. Heath silently decided in his heart. Heath. At this moment, a call suddenly came from the depths of his soul. It was Nina, who was in the ring. Because Heath had left his own spiritual imprint in the ring, Nina, as the ring's tool spirit, was naturally able to communicate with him through this spiritual imprint. However, in order to reduce the consumption of the soul, Nina was usually in a dormant state. Now that she had suddenly taken the initiative to contact Heath, there must be something going on. Heath could not help but ask, "What's wrong, Nina?" Chapter 237, Dispute. Nina said, "Can you help me buy that bunch of soul grass?" Heath turned his head and quickly saw the material that Nina was talking about. It was a bunch of light purple grass with many patterns on its leaves. This was a soul grass, a material that could recover soul power. Nina had now completely transformed into a soul life form. These materials were very helpful to her recovery of soul power. Heath thought to himself, of course. With that, he bought the soul grass. It wasn't an expensive material in itself, and it only cost him 2 high-grade magic stones. Nina said happily, thank you so much." Heath said, "Don't mention it. I promised you that I would do my best to help you recover your soul power before sending you back, didn't I?" In fact, after Robert's mediation, the pressure Heath faced from the Partridge family had become negligible. It could even be said that there was no pressure at all. Nina's previous agreement with him had also become dispensable. However, Heath had helped Nina not because of the threat of the Partridge family, but because Nina came from Ares College and the land of Farron. As a wizard, Heath was very interested in Ares College and the land of Farron. "Hey, are you done buying? Hurry up and get out of the way." At this moment, a voice sounded in Heath's ear. A man in his 40s appeared in front of the stall. He wore a shawl, a jazz hat on his head, and a harp on his back. He looked like a bard, he was probably a grey wizard. The aisle in front of the carriage was a little narrow, and Heath was standing in the middle. It seemed that this caused the man to be dissatisfied. "Oh, please go ahead." Heath did not waste any time and stepped aside. The man walked forward and pointed at the forest banshee tied to the side. "How much is this banshee?" The old witch said, 200 high-level magic stones." The man said with disdain, 200 high-grade magic stones? Why don't you go rob it? 150 high-grade magic stones. Are you selling it? The old witch said angrily, "You are 100 times more greedy than a vampire. Go to the flea shaman and have a look. I don't have the goods you want to buy." The man frowned and raised the price. 180. The old witch hesitated. The man persuaded, 180 high-level magic stones is not a small amount. Although you have tamed this forest banshee, the purity of her bloodline is average. It is good enough to be sold at this price. Don't be too greedy. The old witch struggled for a while, as if she was ready to agree. 200 high-level magic stones, I want it. At this time, a voice suddenly came from behind. A young man walked over not far away. He wore a long robe made of fine linen and held a golden cane in his hand. He was dressed like a noble gentleman, and there were a few young and beautiful maids by his side. The young man came to the front of the stall and took out a bag of magic stones and handed it over. Here are 200 high-grade magic stones. However, before the old witch could take the pouch, a hand grabbed the young man's wrist. It was the bard who had bid earlier. The bard said, "Don't you see? I was the one who came first." The corner of the young man's mouth curled up in a contemptuous arc. He said arrogantly, "In a business transaction, the highest bidder gets it. If you can't afford it, then get lost." Then, he shook off the bard's hand. The bard was furious. "You're courting death." As he spoke, a strong spiritual wave surged out of his body, and the surrounding elements became active. Yay! Is someone going to make a move at the Magic Tree Airport? Where did that young man come from? How dare he provoke the vagabond Harker? Doesn't he know that guy is crazy? This is going to be a good show. Seeing that there was going to be a good show, the surrounding wizards all gathered here and surrounded the place in an instant. Contrary to everyone's good news, Heath, who was standing in front of them, took the initiative to walk away from the crowd. There should be a limit to joining in the fun. The conflict between wizards was not a joke. He did not want to be involved in a fight just to join in the fun. A conflict was inevitable, but at this moment... Stop! Are you trying to rebel? A stern voice sounded from afar. A huge white bird flew over from afar. The guardian is here. Tisk, his reaction is really fast. The crowd around them dispersed in disappointment. This was the guardian of the market, one of the guards in charge of maintaining the order of the market. He was a bird creature of the forest race called Laspot, and was considered an intelligent species. It had the strength of a medium-level wizard when it reached adulthood. The bard's expression changed slightly, and he quickly put away the hostility on his face. He bowed and said, "Lord Laspot." Under the premise that they did not know the other party's name, they would usually address the forest race wizard by the name of their race to express their respect. The big bird landed on the tree trunk at the side, and its sharp claws firmly grabbed the tree trunk. It first glanced at the bard. "So it's Harker." It paused. It continued, "Harker, what are you doing? This is the Magic Tree Airport of Alves. All private fights are forbidden. If you don't want to be turned into a rat and locked in the Black Tower, then you'd better stop your stupid actions immediately." The Alves family was a wizard family active in this generation. It was also one of the most powerful wizard families on the west coast. The bard pointed at the young man next to him and said unhappily, "Sir, someone is disturbing the order here. They are not following the rules." The big bird's gaze fell on the young man. The young man crooked his mouth and said, "Tisk." As he spoke, he took out a badge and handed it over. After seeing the badge that the young wizard handed over, Heath, who was standing in the distance, could not help but be stunned. What a coincidence! At the same time, the big bird said with a strange expression, "Eh? So it's a partridge, you're one of the partridge's people." Yes, the badge that this young man handed over was the badge of the partridge family that had a grudge with him. The crowd was in an uproar. "I was wondering, so it's a member of the partridge family. No wonder they're so arrogant. The wanderer is doomed this time." "That's hard to say." "That's crazy, Harker." The young man said proudly. "Any other questions?" The big bird's attitude obviously changed. This friend of the partridge family, although this is the Alves family's market. I hope you can abide by our rules and not cause trouble in the market." The young man said, "I'm buying my forest banshee. Business is always for the highest bidder. Is there a problem?" The big bird frowned. "This." The bard next to him frowned. "Lord Laspot, are you going to be biased?" The big bird hesitated for a moment and said, "Harker, since you haven't completed the transaction just now, then others naturally have the right to buy it. Is that okay?" Bard Harker said, "Then there should be a first come, first served distinction, right?" Big Bird thought for a moment and said, "Look, others haven't sold it to you yet." Harker took out a bag of magic stones and handed it to the old witch on the spot. "Here are 200 high-level magic stones. I'll take this forest banshee." However, before the old witch could take it, a voice sounded again. The young man next to him sneered. "I'll give you 300. Chapter 238, Conk. Harker's face sank. If it could be described as unexpected before, then it was obvious that he was looking for trouble. Good, good, good. What a great partridge family, I got it. Harker shot a cold glance at the young man, and did not waste any more time, squeezing out of the crowd and leaving quickly. After Harker left, the big bird said to the young man, "Forgive me for being blunt, young man of the partridge family. You should not do this." Its tone was full of dissatisfaction. The young man sneered, "A muggle." His tone was full of arrogance. The big bird said, "This is the dark forest. Those who can mingle here are not good people. Grey wizards are those who are between black and white. Not long ago, a noble witch came here. She is the young lady of the Slavit family. However, her whereabouts are still unknown. No one knows whether she is alive or dead. This is the dark forest. One moment of carelessness and you will fall into the dark forest." Slavit, like Partridge, was one of the top 10 families in the Western continent. Like Partridge, Slavit was also one of the ruling families of the Tower of Order. In short, you should be careful. If there is no need, you should go back to the Tower of Order as soon as possible. Without waiting for the young man to reply, it flapped its wings and flew away. Humph! The young man snorted and threw a magic stone bag at the stall, leading the forest banshee to the side. The crowd began to whisper. "Tisk tisk, having Partridge's blood is different from being arrogant." With such arrogance, no wonder Harker was so angry. A newborn chick. I hope he can continue to be so arrogant. Tisk tisk, this is the dark forest. This is the dark forest where there is no return. Does anyone really think that this is the end? On the other side, Nina, who was inside Heath's ring, also joined in the fun. After obtaining Heath's permission, she flew out of the ring. She snorted in the direction where Harker had left. Their ancestor Partridge was such a low-key person when he followed the Wizard King. Who would have thought that his descendants were all idiots? Heath glanced at the back of the young man as he left, but he did not say anything. Everything could not be seen on the surface. When the bard was mobilizing his magic power, he noticed that the female apprentices around the young man had spread out a little to the side. Although it was very hidden, but Heath could still see that their positions formed the position of a magic circle. To be able to change the formation in an instant, no matter if he was arrogant or not, it meant that the other party must have a certain level of strength. Let's go somewhere else." After leaving this stall, Heath continued to walk towards the market. Along the way, he turned on the system's extraction function, extracting the goods along the street. For a moment, the sound of dripping continued. All the extraordinary substances that could be extracted were all taken by Heath. When they passed by a stall, Nina suddenly called out to Heath. "Heath, wait!" Heath stopped in his tracks. "What?" "Buy that conch from the stall next to you." Heath went to the stall next to him and picked up the conch that Nina had mentioned. It was a very common ruby conch with red gemstone-like crystals on its threads. These crystals had excellent magic conductivity. Wizards liked to embed them on their staffs, and this was the biggest value of the ruby conch. Heath picked up the conch and looked around. He did not see anything unusual, so he could not help but ask in his heart, "Is there anything special about this?" Nina said, "Don't worry about it. Buy it. I won't let you suffer a loss." Heath did not ask any more questions after seeing that. It was not very troublesome to dig up the ruby conch, so the price was usually not very expensive. After asking the price, he bought it for 5 high-level magic stones. After walking far away, Nina suddenly cried out in surprise. "Haha, Heath, we've struck it rich." Heath was stunned. "You mean this conch?" Nina extended a finger and pointed at the middle part of the conch. There were a few obvious grooves there. It was obvious that the gemstones embedded in it had been dug out. She asked, "Don't you think it's strange? Why are there a few gemstones missing here?" Hearing Nina's words, Heath was also a little curious. The gemstones on the ruby conch were abnormally hard and completely integrated with the body. Unless some special methods were used to dig it out, it was impossible for it to fall off easily. After careful observation, there seemed to be some cutting marks in the grooves. Obviously, someone had dug out the gems on it. Heath asked, "This conch has been dug out of gems before?" After thinking for a while, he asked in puzzlement, "Then why did that person only dig out a few gems and leave the rest behind?" Carving out the ruby conch was a very troublesome matter. It required a lot of materials to prepare in advance. Once these materials had expired, they had to be prepared again. Therefore, when wizards dug up the ruby conch, they would dig up all the gems on the conch in one go. Nina said, because the wizard who dug up the ruby conch didn't do it for the gems on the conch, but only used the conch to record something. Heath asked in surprise, record? Nina nodded and suddenly asked, I see that you're quite knowledgeable. Have you heard of the people of Aramstead? Heath recalled for a moment, the civilization in the sea. It was a civilization of the sea folk race. Like Essos, it was also an ancient civilization in the age of the gods. It had been magnificent for a period of time, but for some unknown reason, it perished later. At this point, Heath suddenly seemed to have thought of something. He said in surprise, you mean, this conch is actually a volume of records of the archangels? Just like how wizards on land like to copy words and knowledge on sheepskin, the people of Aramstead were used to recording their civilization on various shellfish, and one of the most common was the ruby conch. I didn't think that there would be such a knowledgeable wizard like you in such a remote place like the West Coast. What's even more rare is that you're a muggle. Nina clicked her tongue. After a pause, she began to explain, the few rubies that have been removed are actually the number of the sea conch that the people of Aramstead had given to this volume. They used the ancient Aramstead language. When translated, it was 13 boxes, 26 rows, and number 4. There must be a record of this writing. Heath was extremely surprised. You also know Aramstead language? That thing had long been lost. Heath had searched through the entire library of Shadow Tower, but there was not a single clue. Nina said with a hint of pride, a little. Heath's interest was piqued. He quickly picked up the conch and carefully observed it. At the same time, he felt a little strange. After all, he had just used the system to extract the conch. If there was really a secret hidden on it, the system should be able to extract it from it. Even if he did not understand Aramstead, he should at least be able to extract some fragments. Was there really something recorded on it? Just as Heath was surprised, Nina pointed at the threads on the conch. There's no need to look. These threads are written in Aramaic. Let me help you take a look. As she spoke, she translated the contents of the conch, and Heath successfully learned the secret hidden in it. Chapter 239, On Guard. Wizard Tool. After listening to Nina's introduction, Heath could not help but be stunned. Are you saying that this is the blueprint of a wizard tool? Nina nodded. Yes, give me a quill and I'll help you write it down. Coming to an empty tree hole at the side, Heath took out a sheepskin scroll and a quill and handed it to Nina. After this period of recuperation, her soul power had also recovered quite a bit. Now, she could materialize for a short period of time. She picked up the quill and began to copy. In a short while, the densely packed runic formulas were written on the sheepskin. Heath picked it up and took a closer look. It's really a wizard tool. The name of the wizard tool was Mermaid Sea Gills. It was a kind of lifestyle wizard tool. Its main function was to enable people to breathe underwater, which was very useful in deep-sea diving. Heath said happily, Nina, you're really a smart kid. The lifestyle wizard tool was also a wizard tool, especially this kind of lifestyle wizard tool that could dive into the deep sea. It had always been very practical. The price in the wizard world was not low either. It cost at least hundreds of thousands of magic stones, not to mention the blueprint. A few high-level magic stones in exchange for a wizard tool blueprint. This business could not only be described as cost-effective. Nina tugged at her skirt and bowed, elegantly saying, this is the most beautiful compliment I've heard today. At this point, she seemed to have thought of something. Suddenly, she said, oh right, a part of the runes in the middle of this wizard tool is already damaged. However, I have deduced from the structure and grammar of the front and back. There shouldn't be a problem. However, if you are preparing to make it, you still have to check it. So that was it. Was it because of this that the system had not found anything before? The system's extraction could only be complete knowledge. For example, a character. No matter how hidden it was, as long as it was complete, it could be extracted. However, if a corner of the character was missing, or even only half of it was left, it might not necessarily be able to be extracted. Heath nodded. Okay. Let's take a look again. Maybe we can find something good in this market. With this good start, the two of them walked around the market even more carefully. Heath had a unique advantage when it came to things that were simple and crude. After all, through the system's extraction, he could easily discover those little secrets that outsiders could not know. However, Picking up something like this could only be done by luck. The market at Magic Tree Airport was not large, so after circling around, Heath did not discover anything. After leaving the last stall, Nina said in disappointment, "It seems like there isn't any more." Heath was not depressed at all. "It doesn't matter, it's more than enough." After wandering around for a while, his spiritual power had increased by 1.8. His other strength, agility, physique, and even his soul power and soul mutation had all increased to varying degrees. It was comparable to several months of hard training. Other than that, most of the materials needed to prepare the sublimation water had been purchased. Now, there were only 3. As he walked out of the market, Heath glanced at the spiritual power on the system interface. Spiritual power 186. Looking back a year ago, Heath's spiritual power was only around 150, barely past the beginner stage of the wizard realm. After a year of training, it had reached 186, a total increase of more than 30 points. 200 points meant that you could reach the advanced stage of the wizard realm. And now, Heath was not far from that level. "Where are we going now?" Nina asked. Heath thought for a moment and said, "Let's go to the dark forest to take a look first. I remember that there should be children's candies nearby. Let's see if we can find them." Children's candies were a kind of fruit that grew in the dark forest. Their main purpose was to concoct sublimation water. They were one of the 3 materials that Heath lacked at the moment. The remaining 2 were the purple coral and the blessing of a high-level demonized creature. As they walked down the street, the 2 of them arrived at the root of the tree. There was a hole in the tree in front of them. They could enter the dark forest on the ground through the hole. Beside the hole stood a few goblins with dark green skin, sharp noses, and sharp mouths. They were the guards that the Alves family had placed at the entrance and exit. Just as they reached the entrance of the tree hole, Heath was blocked by these little monsters. "Wizard in front, stop your steps and accept the interrogation." Heath stopped his steps. The goblins looked around Heath and began to interrogate him carefully. "Who are you? Why haven't I seen you before? Is this your first time coming to the Magic Tree Airport?" Heath nodded. "Yes." The goblin raised his head and looked at Heath. Then, he said, "Show me your key." "Key?" Heath was puzzled. The goblin's expression was obviously confused. "Every wizard who enters the Magic Tree Airport will be given a key." "Don't tell me you don't know." Heath said truthfully, "I really don't know." The goblin immediately bared his teeth and said with a fierce expression, "Don't play tricks on me." "Key? Take out the key." Heath frowned. What was going on with this goblin? Did he take the wrong medicine? What happened? At this moment, a voice sounded. Then came the sound of wings flapping. The big bird that they had seen before flew over here. The goblins quickly bowed. "Lord Laspot." The big bird landed in front of them, folded its wings, and said, "What happened here? Why did I hear you guys making so much noise over there?" The goblin immediately pointed at Heath and said, "This grey wizard, he doesn't have a key." The big bird looked at Heath with a puzzled expression for a while and said in surprise, "Wizard, where did you come from? Where's your lay?" Heath could clearly feel that the magic power on its body was already secretly surging. He explained, "I'm a warrior who just retired from the bloody battlefield. I got off the airship when it docked here this morning. I don't know any key, and no one has given me this thing." The big bird was stunned. "You're from the bloody battlefield?" It asked, "How do you prove it?" Heath thought for a moment and took out the silver badge that Robert had given him when he left the battlefield. "Does this count?" "Silver badge?" The big bird was shocked. It quickly flapped its wings and moved aside. It bent down and said respectfully, sorry, sir. We were rash. These 2 damn goblins have disturbed you." Those who could take out silver badges were at least high-ranking generals in the bloody battlefield. In the Western continent, they were all equivalent to wizard masters. Heath's lack of a key was also related to this badge. Any wizard who entered Magic Tree Airport would receive a key from Magic Tree Airport as proof of identity. However, this was only for ordinary wizards. A wizard with a status like Heath had no need for this at all. After all, his silver badge was the best proof of his identity. Previously, when he got off the ship, he had also taken the VIP passage. Of course, no one would give him a key. The 2 goblin elders were already scared silly. After a moment, they both knelt on the ground and begged for mercy. The big bird looked at Heath's expression and made sure that he wasn't angry. It quickly pleaded for the two goblins, "They didn't mean to offend you, sir. It's just that the higher-ups have given us pressure, so we have to defend ourselves to the death." Heath asked casually, "Did something happen?" As he was wandering around the market, he had noticed that the security of the market seemed to be too tight. He could see patrolling goblins everywhere. The big bird hesitated for a moment. "This," Heath said, "if I don't pursue the matter, explain it clearly." After hearing that, the big bird no longer hesitated. He said, "All right, this isn't a secret that can't be told. Almost everyone knows what happened here recently." Chapter 240, Darkness. The young lady of the Slavit family left Magic Tree Airport not long ago to collect some materials. But after that, the girl disappeared without a trace. She hasn't been seen since then. The Slavit family is very angry about this. They gave us a lot of pressure at the old airport, so we can't do anything about it recently. I'm very sorry, wizard. The goblins didn't mean to offend you. The big bird spoke helplessly. Heath raised his eyebrows and asked casually, "Missing? No clues at all?" Since Magic Tree Airport was under the jurisdiction of the Alves family, they should have set up a magic circle to monitor the surrounding area. Moreover, a family of the Slavit family's level. They should have some protection measures for the members of the family. Even if they were in danger, it was impossible to leave no clues. The big bird shook its head. "No. We've looked at the crystal ball. There's nothing on it." After a pause, the big bird said, "In short, this is the dark forest. The geographical environment is complicated, and not all places can be monitored. Moreover, there are many people here. We can only ensure the safety of the airport. Sir, you must pay more attention to your own safety after you leave this place." Heath nodded. "Okay, thank you for your advice." After saying goodbye to the big bird, Heath immediately moved forward, came to the tree hole in front, and jumped down. The inside of the tree hole was hollow, like a long tunnel slide. The slide was spiral-shaped, and it rotated all the way down. The inside was cast with a wind-type acceleration spell. After entering, the speed suddenly increased, as if it was flying. One could even hear the fierce sound of the wind breaking. After sliding for more than 10 minutes, the slope in front of him began to gradually slow down. His speed also gradually decreased until he finally stopped. Clack! A soft sound was heard. Heath slid out of the hole in the tree and stood firmly on the empty ground. After dusting himself off, Heath turned his head to look behind him. Behind him was an incomparably huge tree. The trunk of the tree was thousands of meters in diameter, and its height was at least hundreds of kilometers. One could not see the end of it at a glance. When he raised his head, he could only see the branches spread open. Lush leaves grew on the tree and covered the entire sky. It's truly spectacular. No matter how many times one saw such a world seed, one could not help but be amazed. In front of such a huge object, even a wizard was as small as an ant. "This is just a small world tree," Nina said from the side with a hint of disdain in her tone. Heath asked, "Do they grow a lot in Farron?" "Of course." Nina nodded. "There are many things like world trees, world turtles, and world fruits in Farron. Our academy is built on a big lizard. The teachers find it boring to stay in one place, so they often take all of us students on a trip. We can also collect some necessary materials on the way." Heath raised his eyebrows. He knew that wizards often went on trips, but it was very rare for them to bring all the teachers and students along. He could not help but ask, "Is it so wonderful? Then I will see the truth." Nina said straightforwardly, "No problem." After a pause, she advised, "If you want me to say it, don't go to Dawn Tower. That shabby place is no longer good. Those who stay there are stubborn old men who don't want to make progress. Other than some outdated knowledge, there is nothing to learn there. Why don't you come with me to Ares College? I can introduce my teacher to you." Although his temper is a little strange, the old man still has real talent. If you can get his recognition, you will definitely benefit a lot. Stigmata wizards are also divided into different grades. Nina seemed to look down on Dawn Tower. After learning that Heath was going to Dawn Tower, she tried to persuade him to go to Ares College. Heath said casually, "We'll talk about it when the time comes. It's still early anyway." He knew very little about this Ares College. No matter how high and mighty Nina said it was, of course, he could not easily believe it. Nina pouted. Up to you. Let's go. Let's find the materials first. As they chatted, Heath led Nina to the forest in front of them. Although they had been in the dark forest for a long time, Heath had always stayed in the bloody battlefield. This was the first time he had entered the real dark forest. Just as his name suggested, this was a dark forest. There was black soil under their feet, and all they could see were black trees. Their trunks were tall and big, and their lush branches blocked out most of the sunlight. As a result, the sky was very dark, walking into it was like walking into an abyss. Pitter-patter. Squeak, squeak, squeak. In this dark space, all sorts of strange sounds could be heard from time to time. In the flourishing pile of weeds, there were even some bright spots of light. Most of them were glowing bugs or the eyes of some kind of beast. Woo-woo, woo-woo-woo. The dry and white mountain wind blew through the forest, and there were frequent woo-woo-woo sounds, like the shrieks of a devil. It was eerie and terrifying. This was the first impression that Heath felt. Squeak, squeak. Whoosh, whoosh. After walking for a while, a series of uncomfortable squeaks suddenly sounded in Heath's ears. Then, he saw something scurrying around in the treetops, quickly approaching him. After a few breaths, he could vaguely see a monster appearing on the tree trunk next to him. It was a huge spider. It was about 2 meters tall, and its entire body was white. There were red patterns all over its body, and the 8 green replicas looked extremely strange. White Devil. Heath's gaze lingered on the spider for a while, and soon recognized its identity. It was a demonized creature called the White Devil. It was a high-level demonized insect species, and a close combat demonized creature. It had a few spells, and its overall strength was about the same as a wizard. Squeak squeak. At the same time, the White Devil on the tree let out a sharp screech and jumped down from the tree trunk. It raised its 2 forelimbs that were as sharp as blades and chopped down at Heath. Heath's toes touched the ground and jumped back, easily avoiding the spider's attack. Then, he raised his right hand. On his right hand, there was a leather glove with 5 fingers exposed. There was a small pocket on the glove. This was Heath's special dimensional glove. The space inside was very small. It was specially placed with some equipment that he usually used in battle so that he could take it out at any time during battle. At this moment, the light on the dimensional glove flashed and disappeared. Soon after, a dark red greatsword was already in his hand. Holding the red demon greatsword, Heath looked at the White Devil in front of him with great interest. This was his first time hunting such a creature, and such a creature would usually be able to obtain quite a lot of attributes, especially when it was a wizard-level demonized creature. How many attribute bonus points can this give me? With anticipation in his heart, Heath held the great sword and charged forward like a fierce tiger. Chapter 241, Candy. White Devil did not disappoint Heath. Heath had obtained 0.1 spiritual power and an average of 0.2 physical attributes from its body. Other than that, he had also obtained its innate spell, Swamp. This was an earth elemental spell. It could change the structure of the land in a small area, turning the blueprint into a soft swamp that could trap the target. After killing White Devil, Heath continued to move forward, and then he met many strange creatures. There were swamp monsters that lived in the swamp, like a lump of mud mixed together, white-legged orangutans with 6 arms, and flame foxes with red fur that would ignite when provoked. Although the dark forest was dangerous, the element content in it was one of the best in the West Coast continent, and even in the entire Wizard continent. The rich amount of elements naturally gave birth to rich demonized creatures. Many demonized creatures that Heath had only read about in books existed here, and they were everywhere. This really made Heath very happy. These magical creatures were all extracted for the first time, and each time they gave him a large number of attribute bonuses. To Heath, this was like walking into a treasure trove. I'll find a place close to the dark forest to settle down. If he extracted all the materials in this forest, he believed that the materials he obtained would be more than enough to advance to an intermediate wizard. Heath bowed and silently decided. In the next few days, Heath stayed in this area of the dark forest to search for the candy monster. The candy monster was a rare demonized creature, and its growth was very random. Although it grew in this forest, it could appear anywhere. There was no other way to collect this material, so he could only slowly search for it bit by bit. Heath simply had patience and time. After ending the bloody battlefield, he no longer had any missions on him, so he could do whatever he wanted. While searching for the candy monster, he also hunted the demonized creatures in the dark forest. Heath's strength was also increasing day by day. Time flew by. A few months later. In the dark forest, near the Magic Tree Airport. Whoosh! Whoosh! The sharp sound of rushing wind could be heard. Two figures flew across the tree trunk one after the other. In front of them was a strange-looking creature. It was only about 30 centimeters tall and looked like a lump of sticky liquid that had been rubbed together. It only had eyes, nose, mouth, and other features on it. The monster gave off a strong sweet smell, as if it was made of syrup. Behind the candy monster was a young man. He was wearing a grayish-black leather armor, a black cloak, and a dark red greatsword flying around him. This was naturally Heath. As he quickly shuttled through the tree trunks, Heath stared at the strange creature in front of him without blinking. "I finally found it." The strange creature in front of him was the target of Heath's trip. It was a child's candy, also known as the candy monster. It was a type of mollusk creature. Other than that, its body tissues were very high in sugar. In addition, it looked like it was made of a lump of syrup, hence its name. Splash! At this moment, the sound of water suddenly came from the front. Vaguely, there was a stream ahead. The candy monster sped up and quickly fled in the direction of the stream. Seeing that, Nina, who was flying beside Heath, quickly said, "Heath, it's escaping." The candy monster was an elemental magic creature. It could freely transform into various elemental forms. Once it escaped into the water, it would transform and disappear into the water. It would be difficult to find it then. Heath's expression was cold. "I know." As he spoke, he waved his right hand to the side, and the red demon that was flying next to him was held in his hand. He held Red Demon and stared at the candy monster in front of him for a while, then he slashed forward with his sword. Whoosh! Whoosh! The sound of fierce wind breaking rang out. Thousands of wind blades swept up in the air, and then like a stampede of beasts, they pounced on the candy monster in front of them. Pft! 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 A series of pft sounds could be heard. The candy monster was cut into tens of thousands of pieces by Heath's wind blades. However, these pieces did not stop. They continued to charge forward at the same speed. After charging for a distance, they regrouped and returned to their original appearance. Heath frowned. He had found the candy monster, but he had encountered a lot of trouble when he was capturing it. This monster had very strong elemental defense and was immune to most of Heath's spells. Only regular spells like Sword Wind could deal damage to it. However, although Sword Wind could hurt it, it could change the structure of its cells to divide. Once it was attacked, it would divide its body cells to avoid the attack. What was more troublesome was that this thing was very timid. Once it saw that the situation was bad, it would turn around and run. In fact, this was the third time Heath had discovered the candy monster in the past few months, but without exception, it had escaped. This time, I will definitely not repeat the same mistake. Heath narrowed his eyes and stared at the candy monster, but he was not in a hurry to attack. Both parties continued to chase. After passing through a few large trees, the terrain ahead suddenly became clear. Both parties came to a lawn. This lawn was connected to the bank of the stream ahead. Once they passed through this lawn, the candy monster would definitely be able to escape into the stream. However, at this moment, Heath moved. His body twisted, and a black shadow quietly surged out from his body. He quickly appeared in front of the candy monster and formed a blurry human figure. Shadow substitution. The black blurry shadow quickly painted its color. On the contrary, Heath, who was at the back, gradually lost its color and turned into black and white. In an instant, Heath, who had been at the back, appeared in front of them. At that moment, Heath raised his right hand and the leather case on his hand flashed. A sheepskin scroll suddenly flew out of the leather case and landed on the surface of the water in front of him. At the same time, Heath held Red Demon and slashed his sword at the candy monster at the back. Pft! 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 Just like the previous attack, when the wind blades swept across the candy monster, it instantly split into countless pieces. Like a piece of water that had been splashed out, it passed through the wind blades and through Heath. It fell straight to the back. And behind it, it was already a small stream. Seeing that it was inevitable for the candy monster to fall into the stream, its body had already begun to become transparent. That was the elemental characteristic of the candy monster that changed its body structure. It was as if it was ready to transform into water and merge into the water. However, at this moment, a blue light suddenly lit up on the stream. Immediately after, an extremely cold air rose from the stream. A series of cracking sounds could be heard. The stream that was originally flowing was actually solidified into layers of solid ice in an instant. Ding! 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 A series of crisp sounds could be heard. Clumps of liquid crashed into the solid ice surface. The candy monster was clearly at a loss. The scattered chewing stopped for a moment, but it quickly took measures and tried to escape in another direction. However, at this moment, an extremely powerful force swept over from all directions. The candy monster on the lake surface was completely frozen at this moment. Chapter 242, Pursue. Got you. Heath took out a small magic potion bottle from his dimensional pocket and controlled the wizard's force field to slowly absorb the frozen candy monster into the small bottle. Although a demonized creature like the candy monster was immune to most elements, its immunity was achieved through the conversion of different elements. Moreover, the moment it underwent the elemental structure conversion, the elemental energy would be greatly reduced, and elemental damage would be able to attack it at this time. After the first two failures, Hester deliberately thought for a while, and finally decided to use the ice element to capture it. After all, the ice element was the easiest to freeze and preserve its body completely. It was guaranteed that after capturing it, it would not destroy its vitality. The candy monster that made the sublimation water had to be fresh, and it could not be dead for more than 2 hours. For this reason, Heath went to the airport and bought a wizard-level ice spell, which was the sheepskin scroll that was used to freeze the creek and the candy monster. Let's see where you can run to. Picking up the small magic potion bottle that had sealed the candy monster, Heath shook it gently through the bottle's mouth. During this period of time, gathering this thing had given him a headache. After corking the bottle and putting away the magic potion bottle, Heath walked back. Nina flew out from the ring appropriately and asked curiously, "We've already obtained the candy monster. Where should we go next?" Heath said, "The Golden Harbor. Purple coral can only be obtained by going out to sea. The nearest starting point is only the Golden Harbor, which is more suitable." Nina said, "By the sea? That's great. I like the sea." While the two were chatting, Heath suddenly stopped. As if he had noticed something, he became alert and looked in one direction. Nina asked curiously, "What's wrong?" Her soul power was much stronger than Heath's, but she didn't feel anything unusual. Heath asked, "Didn't you hear anything?" Nina shook her head with a strange expression. "No. Using one's hearing to determine external changes without using one's soul. Such a wizard. Was really strange. Was this really reliable?" Nina was still suspicious, but Heath had already jumped onto the tree trunk and was quickly heading in that direction. After walking in that direction for a while, suddenly, ding ding ding! A series of rhythmic melodious sounds rang out, as if some kind of string was being plucked. Nina said in surprise, "There really is." Heath raised his finger. "Be quiet. You'd better stay in the ring for a while." After thinking for a while, he simply recalled Nina back into the ring and specially placed a layer of seal on the ring to prevent Nina from coming out privately. As time passed, he became more and more familiar with this ghost girl, so Heath usually kept the ring free to enter and leave, so as to make it convenient for Nina herself. However, he also knew that Nina's personality was more lively, so this was not the right time. Invisibility. After dealing with Nina, Heath chanted a spell and entered invisibility. Then, he continued to move forward. Although he was already invisible, he was still very careful as he passed through the forest, not making a single sound. At present, the invisibility spell he had mastered was something he had learned during his apprenticeship. The invisibility effect was considered one of the best when he was still an apprentice, but it was not so ideal after he had stepped into the wizard level. He could only conceal his vision and spiritual power. He could not conceal the sound and airflow. It was better to be careful. After walking for a few minutes, Heath arrived at an open space. In the middle of the open space, there were two groups of people. One of them was a middle-aged wizard with a harp in his hand. The other was a young wizard leading a few young witches. Seeing these two groups of people, Heath could not help but be surprised, because he knew both of them. They were the two parties who had quarreled over a forest banshee when he had just arrived at the airport a few months ago. The two sides seemed to have just fought. A witch's wand was burning with residual flames, the middle-aged man's clothes had burn marks, and a large part of his hand that was playing the harp had been burnt. At this moment, the two sides were facing each other. The middle-aged man said angrily, "Partridge's bastard, you actually used such a sinister trick like an ambush. Do you have any shame?" The young man sneered and said disdainfully, "Harker, if you didn't take the initiative to show up and attack me, how could you be ambushed by me? You're walking into a trap, haha." Harker's face turned ugly. He held the harp tightly with one hand, and the other hand on the string was already surging with magic power. However, after several times, Harker's face finally relaxed. He said in a deep voice, "Okay, okay, okay, I'll remember you." After saying that, he turned around and was about to leave. However, before he could take 2 steps forward, 2 young witches stepped forward and blocked Harker's way, while the rest of the witches also moved to surround Harker. The young male wizard walked forward and said with a mocking smile, "Are you the clown of the palace banquet? Did you ask for my permission to leave?" Harker's face darkened. "This is the Magic Tree Airport of the Alves family. Do you want to become a dark wizard?" The young man said, "Why didn't you think of becoming a dark wizard when you attacked me just now?" Harker said, "I just want my original things back." The young man narrowed his eyes and slowly drew an arc. "For example," he suddenly said, "the staff of the Earth's core." "The staff of the Earth's core?" Heath, who was hiding at the side, could not help but be slightly stunned. He had heard of the staff of the Earth's core that the young man had mentioned just now. It was a very famous high-level magic weapon on the West Coast. It could be ranked in the top 10 in the entire West Coast. This Harker had the staff of the Earth's core? It was impossible. How could a grey wizard have it? Sigh. Wait. Could it be? Suddenly, Heath's eyes widened. At the same time, after Harker heard the young man's words, he could clearly see that there was something strange on his face. He said in confusion, "I don't know what you are talking about." At this time, the young man had also restrained the laughter and arrogance on his face. Instead, it was replaced by visible anger. He said coldly, "Didn't you buy the forest banshee to use the blood sacrifice ritual to get rid of the spiritual brand on the staff of the Earth's core? After killing people for so long, you still refuse to leave. Aren't you guarding here all day long because you're afraid that after you bring the staff of the Earth's core out of this area, it will activate the curse seal inside? Who are you?" Harker asked. Chapter 243, Watch the Battle. Harker's face turned ugly. The staff of the Earth's core was one of the most important witchcraft tools of the Slavit family. Not many people in the Slavit family knew about its internal structure and use, but now, this stranger knew it like the back of his hand. Harker narrowed his eyes, and the magic power surging in his body became more and more obvious. The young man sneered and said, "You little thief who stole from Slavit, do you think you can still walk out of this forest alive today?" Harker said, "It seems that you really know what you shouldn't know. In that case, then stay here for me." At this point, he suddenly vibrated the strings of the harp. Buzz! 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 Immediately, the heavy sound of the harp string exploded, and a material-like ripple appeared in the air, and spread out in the surroundings at the fastest speed. This invisible ripple had several powerful forces. Wherever the ripple passed, the grass, wood, and soil on the ground were all blown up like an exploding cannonball. The witches in front of them were not in a hurry. They all raised their magic wands. There was a white crystal at the top of their magic wands. At this time, all of them were shining with colorful colors and intertwined to form a cylindrical wall of light. The wall of light covered Harker like an iron bucket. Boom! The ripples and the wall of light collided with a deafening sound, and the ground shook. What a powerful spell! Heath, who was hiding on a tree trunk in the distance, was secretly surprised. Although the range of this spell was not large, the elemental energy generated in that instant was probably around 300 degrees. It should be known that Harker had just plucked the strings of his harp. Is it also a rule-type spell? No. It's still far from a true rule-type spell. I've only comprehended a little of the rules. Just like Heath's sword wind, Harker had just used a rule-type spell. However, his comprehension of the rules had yet to reach the level of establishing a system. He had only comprehended some of the rules. Even though it was just a little rule, it had greatly improved Harker's combat strength. "Go to hell," he roared, and the strings of the harp rippled in the space with each wave. Boom! 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 For a moment, deafening sounds were heard one after another, and the bucket of light that was holding Harker shook violently. Under the impact of this force, the few witches who were maintaining the enchantment obviously did not feel good. Not only were their faces getting paler and paler, but their delicate bodies were also shaking violently, and they looked like they were on the verge of collapse. Rule-type magic. Damn it, that Baryon gave me a piece of shit intelligence. The young man cursed in a low voice. Then, he hurriedly opened the space pocket and took out a magic staff. He raised the magic staff and waved it forward. Immediately, a series of cracking sounds could be heard. The soil on the ground rose up one after another and eventually formed a clay giant that was several meters tall. At the same time, the enchantment set up by the witches had reached its limit. Fine cracks had appeared on the enchantment. Boom! A loud sound was heard. The enchantment could not hold on any longer and exploded into countless energy fragments. The few witches who were maintaining the enchantment immediately suffered a heavy blow. Under the impact of this powerful force, the two witches who were close to the enchantment were blown away. Lena, Mylene. The young man behind the enchantment changed his expression and hurriedly raised his hand. A long vine grew out from the ground and caught the two witches who were falling to the ground. My lord, Lena. Lena is useless. We are dragging my lord down. No, you've done enough. Leave the rest to me. The young man walked over with his magic staff. At the same time, the clay giants on the ground also began to move. There were more than a dozen of these clay giants, each more than 3 meters tall. They stood on the ground like small towers and looked very imposing. You will pay the price, the young man said coldly. As he spoke, he raised his wand with both hands and waved it down. Immediately, the giant stone giants rushed forward together and attacked Harker. When the dozen or so stone giants ran, they would definitely shake the earth and shake the mountains. However, facing such a fierce attack, Harker's expression did not change. He continued to calmly strum the harp strings. However, the speed at which he plucked the harp strings increased a little. Boom! 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 Deafening sounds rang out one after another. Invisible ripples followed Harker's movements as they rushed towards the stone giants in front of him. Even a giant like the stone giants were continuously struck by the zither strings, causing them to tremble violently. Broken stones flew everywhere. There were even 2 stone giants that collapsed with a loud bang midway. Fortunately, there were many stone golems. After paying the price of 2, the remaining stone golems had already arrived in front of Harker. They smashed their huge fists towards Harker's head. Faced with this ferocious attack, Harker raised one of his hands towards the top of his head. A light flashed in his palm, and a transparent shield was quietly unfurled. The shield was not big, but it seemed to have endless power. The giant hand of the stone man smashed onto it with a boom, and then it could not move any further. Whoosh! Then, Harker's body twisted, and in an instant, he appeared dozens of meters away. The strings of the harp trembled, and countless ripples continued to rush towards the stone giants in the field. The battle between the two of them was already at a stalemate, but it could be seen that Harker was trying to gain the upper hand in this stalemate. The stone giants summoned by the young wizard had more than enough strength and agility. Not only were they unable to attack Harker, but they were also being dragged around by him. Harker dodged and dodged as he plucked the strings of his harp to create a ripple attack. The stone giants that followed him fell to the ground one after another. My lord! The situation is getting more and more unfavorable for us. If it doesn't work, we'll retreat first. A few witches quickly gathered over, their expressions anxious. The 2 witches who were in a better condition had already begun to mobilize their magic power, preparing to pull the young male wizard to move. The male wizard frowned, his expression uncertain. It was obvious that he was in a disadvantageous position. These stone golems were summoned by him with all his might. If the stone golems could not deal with Harker in front, then he would be in big trouble. Do I really have to leave? It was not easy to lure this guy out this time. If I give up this opportunity, it will not be easy to catch this cunning dark wizard. Just as the young male wizard was hesitating, a witch suddenly shouted towards a tree trunk, "Who is it? Those who are hiding, come out." As she spoke, she waved her hand, and a wind blade immediately struck the tree trunk. The wind blade hit the right spot, and Heath, who was completely unprepared on the tree trunk, had no time to dodge. He could only summon his mimicry shield to protect himself. Clang! The sound of metal clashing rang out. As the magic power surged, the originally transparent Heath gradually filled in the color and appeared in front of everyone. Chapter 244, Fight! What? Someone's here! The wizards who were fighting in the field were all shocked. They didn't notice that there was another wizard hiding in this place. The battlefield that was bustling with activity suddenly quieted down. Everyone looked at Heath with vigilance. They were all wizards and he was able to sneak up and hide from them. No one wanted to know what would happen if they were ambushed during a life and death battle. A witch asked, "Who are you?" This obviously raised everyone's doubts. Everyone's eyes were focused on Heath. Heath frowned. He had just told himself to be careful. He was invisible and slowed down. Logically speaking, a wizard should not be able to find him. Is she a perceptive witch? Heath silently glanced at the witch who had found him. Then, he took a step back and tried his best to show goodwill. "I'm just a passing wizard. I didn't mean to get involved in your dispute. If I'm disturbing you, I'll leave now." Then, Heath quickly took a step back. "You're the Sword Wizard of Shadow Tower." At this moment, a voice sounded. Heath turned his head. It was the male wizard of the Partridge family. He stared at the big sword on Heath's body for a while and suddenly realized something. He said in surprise, "The Red Demon Greatsword. It's really the Sword Wizard of Shadow Tower." He shouted, "Sir, please help us. I'm Hollander from the law enforcement team of the Tower of Order. Please help us, sir." Heath stopped in his tracks. He glanced at the young wizard with some confusion. He was very surprised that this wizard from the Partridge family would recognize his identity. Then, he thought, "Do you need help?" The law enforcers of the Tower of Order were the officials who maintained order on the West Coast. When handling official business, they had the right to ask the wizards on this land for assistance. However, whether they would help or not depended on the wizard's personal will. Even if Heath let go and left, he could not say anything. At the same time, Harker, who was besieged, had a change in expression. His expression changed and he began to turn in a direction. The first witch who found Heath quickly shouted, "Sir Hollander, he wants to escape." Hollander saw that and quickly shouted to Heath, "Sir Heath, this criminal killed several wizards." It was Sir Robert who personally asked. "For Sir Robert's sake, please help us." Heath looked at him in confusion. Seeing that his eyes were sincere and not fake, he hesitated for a moment and finally stepped forward to block Harker's way. Although he had some grudges with the Partridge family, it was a personal grudge. In terms of fighting crime and maintaining order, he should be in line with the Tower of Order. After all, he was also the beneficiary of the Tower of Order. Hollander was overjoyed. The bloody battlefield was one of the most important matters of the Tower of Order in the near future. People from all walks of life paid attention to it. Whatever happened there and any powerful characters would be immediately reported. On the bloody battlefield, Heath's deeds of fighting against the wraiths on the front line had long been spread. Hollander had heard of his super-strong battle deeds. Hollander quickly said, "Thank you, sir, for your help. I, Hollander, will remember it in my heart." Harker narrowed his eyes and pointed at Heath coldly. "Do you want to die? Get lost." Heath shrugged and picked up the Red Demon Greatsword. Harker sneered. "Good, good, good. Another one who wants to die. Do you really think that I, Harker, am someone to be trifled with?" As he spoke, the harp in his hand was instantly coated with a layer of silver light. At the same time, an unprecedented strong magic wave surged from his body. "Peak Wizard." The young male wizard from the Tower of Order narrowed his eyes slightly. This time, he finally understood why the few of them had fallen into such a bitter battle just now. The strength of this Harker in front of him had already reached the peak. He was only a hair's breadth away from becoming a rank 2 wizard. "Damn you, Barian! Wait for me to go back and see if I'll break his head." He quickly commanded the witches to build a defensive barrier in front of him. Although he did not know what level of spell Harker was going to cast next, just by looking at the magic power surging in this space, he knew that it was definitely not a joke. "Lord Hollander, look at that wizard." At this moment, a witch suddenly pointed at Heath. Heath was holding the Red Demon Greatsword in one hand, standing there without moving. He did not seem to be on guard at all. Hollander frowned and quickly shouted, "Wizard Heath, that Harker has already reached the peak level. Being arrogant in front of such an opponent will only harm you." Heath raised his greatsword and said indifferently, "If you want my help, don't tell me what to do." The witches frowned, obviously dissatisfied with Heath's arrogance. "Sir, is this wizard really reliable?" I don't see how powerful he is, but I see how stupid he is. The witches began to underestimate Heath at the same time. Hollander frowned. This. He also became a little confused. Facing such a powerful spell, he was not prepared to defend at all. Any other wizard would look extremely stupid. But Heath's performance did not seem like a wizard who had been through hundreds of battles. Before Hollander could figure it out, Harker had already launched an attack. He quickly plucked the strings, and a melodious mysterious melody sounded in everyone's ears. As the music sounded, the space also changed. With Harker as the center, the space around him suddenly became illusory and distorted. Ripples that seemed to be real quietly appeared, quickly distorting and stretching to both sides. Harker, who was in the distorted space, seemed to become blurry. When the music reached a certain rhythm, "It's coming!" Hollander immediately became nervous. At the same time, Harker swept the strings with his right hand. Suddenly, a large number of distorted ripples swept toward Hollander and the others like a tide. The ripples struck the enchantment that the witches had just built, but the sturdy enchantment was as fragile as a piece of white paper here. With a tearing sound, it collapsed and began to collapse. Hollander's expression suddenly changed. He hurriedly opened his space pocket and took out a kite shield from it. He threw it forward, and the kite shield floated forward and opened another enchantment. Only then did it barely block the distorted ripples. Hollander wiped off the cold sweat on his forehead. Although he had already predicted that Harker's attack was extraordinary, when the attack really swept over, it still gave him a fright. This level was definitely a rule spell. How could an ordinary wizard be a match for such a level? "Lord Hollander, you! Look!" At this moment, a witch suddenly shouted at him. Hollander looked in the direction the witch was pointing at. "What?" At this point, his voice suddenly stopped, and his eyes suddenly widened. Chapter 245, Harp. What caught Hollander's attention was Heath's side. On that side, they were also attacked by Harker's spatial ripples. However, unlike Hollander's side, which did their best to defend, Heath did not defend against the spatial ripples at all. Not only did he not defend, he was still attacking. He kept waving the red demon greatsword in his hand, slashing towards the spatial ripples that were flying towards him. And every time he swung his sword, large amounts of wind blades would surge around him. The vast momentum and surging energy were not weaker than the spatial ripples in front of him. Hollander was shocked. Rule-type spell. The special rhythm of the wind blades surging when they swept up was something that no knowledgeable wizard could mistake. At the same time, the two rule-type spells began a head-on battle. Boom! 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 A deafening rumble sounded, and the wind blades and spatial ripples in the sky exploded in the air. The huge amount of elemental fluctuations had completely distorted and torn the entire space. There was even a tiny crack between the two, and within the crack was a black void. Anyone who was familiar with the structure of the world would be able to recognize the identity of this void crack at a glance. It was the void that was everywhere in this world. Hollander and the witches could not help but take a deep breath, and a trace of cold sweat appeared on their foreheads. The void was an existence that even the stigmata-level wizards did not dare to touch lightly. Now, it was actually activated by two junior wizards. This was the strength of the rule-type spells. Boom! 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 The battle was still ongoing. Harker kept on vibrating the harp strings and creating spatial ripples, while Heath kept on brandishing his cross-shaped sword and slashing out wind blades in retaliation. Seeing that the battle was still going on, Harker was clearly a little anxious. Unlike Heath, who had completely mastered the rule-type spell, he only had a little understanding of the rule-type spell. The reason why he could use the rule-type spell at this time was mainly because of some special methods, but the borrowed power was only temporary. Damn it! Die! Die! In his anger, he roared and increased the frequency of plucking the harp strings. The ripples he sent out grew more and more concentrated. Under such a concentrated attack, Hollander and the others could no longer withstand it. They did not dare to continue standing in front of Harker. Instead, they controlled the kite shield to move far away. However, Heath was still standing where he was. It was as if his legs had taken root and sprouted on the ground. He only increased the frequency of red demon in his hands. He adjusted his speed to match the frequency of Harker's strumming. His face was calm and there was no sign of panic. This guy is a monster. A monster. Too powerful, too powerful. Is he really just a beginner wizard? Hollander and the others behind him were completely stunned. Harka's burst of rule-type spells was already shocking enough. They did not expect Heath to have mastered a rule-type spell as well, and he was clearly more proficient than Harker. Since when did rule-type spells become so worthless? Isn't that a domain that only advanced wizards can come into contact with? Hollander was extremely shocked. At the same time, the battle ahead was nearing its end. The borrowed power was still borrowed. As time passed, the silver light and bright runes on the harp had gradually dimmed. The speed at which Harker plucked the harp's strings had also obviously decreased. The originally dense spatial ripples had gradually become numerous. Harker's trembling hands and his increasingly pale face all indicated that he was currently struggling. After this continued for a while, the music suddenly stopped, and Harker's spell also stopped. Heath, who was opposite him, could not help but frown. No more. This was the first time he fought with another wizard who mastered a rule-type spell. The reason why he did not dodge or defend just now was precisely because he wanted to see his opponent's rule-type spell and understand some knowledge of the rules. During the battle just now, he did feel some different rules that he had never understood before. If he continued, these rules would definitely be very helpful for him to break through the second domain of swordsmanship. How? How is it possible? How can you still be alive? Harker seemed to be unable to accept the truth. His expression became crazy as he looked at Heath in front of him and muttered to himself over and over again. It's impossible for me to fail. It's impossible for me to fail. It's impossible for me to fail. No one can win against me. He roared furiously as he crazily plucked the strings in his hands. However, at this moment, the luster of the strings had already dimmed. The plucked strings only produced some random noises. There were no longer the terrifying spatial ripples from before. Move. Move. You piece of trash. Trash. Finally, under his incessant plucking of the strings, the harp in Harka's hand finally shone with a silver glow once again. A wave of power had once again gathered. However, before Harker could be happy, a bang sound was suddenly heard from the strings. A string was cut in the middle. The power that had just gathered suddenly surged out from the broken strings like a wild beast that had lost control, and it struck straight at Harker. Harker's eyes were about to split open. No. At the same time, a huge ripple appeared in the space and struck Harker's body. Harker's body first paused, and then his entire body twisted and deformed. Boom! A loud noise was heard. Broken body parts flew everywhere, blood splattered into the sky, and the whole forest was dyed red in an instant. Harker up ahead. Boom! Dong! A heavy sound was heard. The harp that Hark had just held in his hand fell upon the grass, and the broken strings were drowned in blood. Heath walked forward, picked up the harp, and took out a handkerchief to wipe the blood stains on it. The structure and style of the harp were no different from an ordinary harp. The body part of the harp was a sculpture of a young girl, and the two arms and legs were stretched out at a right angle, forming the main body part of the harp. Harker can use the rule spell probably because of this harp, right? Heath looked at the harp in his hand curiously. When he was fighting with Harker earlier, he clearly felt that Harker's power came mainly from the harp. Clearly, Harker had used some kind of power from this harp to cast the rule-based magic. What kind of harp is this? Can this harp be extracted? What will be extracted? Wondering, he thought to himself. Extract. Chapter 246, Fragment. Beep, extraction successful. Obtained wizard tool blueprint twisted harp. Beep, extraction successful. Rule power +1. 2 notifications rang in Heath's ears. A large amount of unfamiliar information surged into Heath's mind, including the principle of the harp blueprint and the rule power attached to the harp. Just as Heath had guessed, the main reason why Harker could use rule-based spells was because of this harp. This was a rule-based wizard tool. As the name suggested, rule-based wizard tools were wizard tools that solidified rule-based spells. Through this method, wizards could use rule-based spells even if they did not have the relevant knowledge yet. Heath was overjoyed. Haha, this is really unexpected. The materials needed to make a rule-type wizard tool were extremely rare, and each rule-type wizard tool could be described as priceless. Wizard Heath. At this moment, a voice came from behind. It was the young wizard, Hollander, from before. Hollander walked over and bowed respectfully. Wizard Heath, thank you very much for your help. On behalf of the law enforcement team of the Tower of Order, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to you. Heath waved his hand and said indifferently, there's no need to thank me. His indifferent reaction immediately caused the several witches behind Holland to frown. They were obviously unhappy. One of the witches said, can you straighten up your attitude? The person standing in front of you is Lena. Hollander interrupted the witch's words. He said harshly, a heroic act should be treated with courtesy and not harshness. If it wasn't for Wizard Heath's help, we might not have been able to catch Harker today. Lena bit her lips and lowered her head. Yes. Hollander turned his head and bowed to Heath again. I'm very sorry. I will punish my maid for her offense. I hope you won't take it to heart. Heath raised his eyebrows and looked at Hollander in surprise. According to the wizards he had come into contact with, purebloods usually carried a sense of arrogance, especially the Partridge family from before. It was rare to see someone so polite. Seeing that the other party was so polite, Heath relaxed a little and nodded. You're welcome. The smile on Hollander's face became more cordial. He introduced himself more formally. I'm a beginner wizard of the Tower of Order, Hollander Partridge. I'm the captain of the Crimson Lizard Law Enforcement Team. It's a pleasure to meet you. Heath said, nice to meet you. Hollander smiled and said, recently, I have heard about the rumors about you when I was in my family. You are a new wizard of the Dark Forest, a new generation genius of Shadow Tower, a mutated muggle. Ahem. As if he had missed something, he coughed dryly and changed the topic, in short, you have been in the limelight recently. Heath said humbly, people always like to exaggerate. Hollander shook his head. No, I thought so too before this, but now I feel that those rumors still underestimate your excellency. It's rare to see a beginner wizard who can master rule-type spells. Could this guy have some ulterior motive? Seeing him praising him with shining eyes, Heath felt a little embarrassed. He nodded and said, thank you. After a pause, he changed the topic and asked, did you come here for Harker? Oh, forgive me for being presumptuous, but this shouldn't be said, right? When law enforcers carried out missions, they usually had to keep it a secret. Hollander shook his head. It's okay, this is not a secret mission. After a pause, he explained, Harker, formerly known as Rogue Bulak, is a dark wizard from Star Moon Bay. We've been keeping an eye on him for a long time. According to Hollander, Heath had a general understanding of the whole situation. The Harker that he had just killed was actually a dark wizard who specialized in robbing and murdering other wizards' resources. His whereabouts had always been erratic and good at disguising himself. Every time he killed, he would clean up the aftermath and leave no traces behind. No one could find any evidence against him. In addition, he had always robbed and killed Muggle apprentices. Therefore, he did not attract too much attention. Until not long ago, the young lady of the Slavit family had disappeared here. This young lady was also a direct descendant of the Slavit family. The whole incident immediately caused the Slavit family to be furious. A high-level wizard within the family had used a very high-level divination technique. In addition, there was a special spiritual imprint on the staff of the Earth's core in the hands of that young lady. Only then did they finally lock onto this target. I really don't know what this guy was thinking. Who isn't good at robbing? He actually targeted the young lady of the Slavit family. Seeing the staff, he should know her identity. Even so, he still refused to stop. Hollander said in disdain. Heath also felt it was a little strange. From Hollander's description, this Harker should be an old hand. He should know who he could touch and who he couldn't touch. He shouldn't have made such a mistake. We'll know after the trial. The witch, Lena, walked forward. As she spoke, she took out a bell and gently shook it. With the sound of the bell, clusters of blue flames suddenly rose in the surroundings. Then, they flew toward the center and finally gathered into a human figure. It was Harker from before. It was similar to Heath's soul-searching spell. This was also a spell that worked on the soul. Lena took out a crystal ball. Harker on the ground was immediately sucked in, just like an ember. The matter came to an end at this point. Hollander then asked, Wizard Heath, where are you going now? I know a castle in the Dark Forest where you can eat rare delicacies on the market. The banquet held by the hostess there is also very interesting. If you are not busy, we can go and have a look together. Heath declined politely, forget it. I still have some things to deal with at the Gold Coast. Hollander said, the Gold Coast. That's a pity. Well. How about this? He opened his dimensional pocket and took out a small bottle. Inside the bottle were some black pieces, like pieces of dried fruit. Heath took a look and recognized the pieces. Skunk fruit was a special fruit in the wizard world. Each skunk fruit had a unique taste. Through this principle, wizards could locate the pieces of the same fruit. Then, they could find each other to send messages. Hollander took out a piece and handed it to Heath. "When I'm done here, I'll visit you again. Don't turn me away." Heath accepted the fruit. Okay. Chapter 247, Entering the Human World. After collecting the candy, Heath had no reason to stay here any longer. The next morning, he took an airship to the Gold Coast. More than a month later, in a forest on the west side of the Gold Coast. In the early morning, the sun had just risen. The sun shone through the treetops and fell on the forest, illuminating the lush green grass, the tall oak trees, and the little squirrels yawning out of the tree holes. Da-da-da. A series of footsteps sounded. Two figures walked over from the muddy forest path. One was a handsome young man. He was wrapped in a black cloak and carried a dark red great sword on his back. The other was a young girl in a red dress. The girl floated in the air. Her body was translucent, like a legendary ghost. "We secretly put sleepyheads in teacher's drawer and stole his key while he was asleep. Haha, that stupid dog in the corridor has 3 heads for nothing. We used a calf sausage to make it obedient. In teacher's mystical realm, I even kicked Nick into the Milk River." After interacting with her for some time, Heath realized that Nina was a very cheerful and lively girl. She would always talk to Heath about many interesting things that happened in the academy. This included the fact that she and some mischievous classmates used sleepyheads to steal the teacher's keys and sneak into the teacher's mystical realm. Heath asked, "Didn't your teacher find out later?" Nina said, "Why not? We were punished terribly. Nick was grounded, LeVar was punished with no pocket money, and even I was reprimanded by the teacher for a long time." Heath said speechlessly, "Your teacher is really quite friendly." Every wizard treated their own achievements as if they were their own lives. Thinking from another perspective, Heath felt that if someone came to his laboratory to mess around, that person had to be prepared to be crushed by him. Nina nodded. "He is the most outstanding teacher in the world." Heath said curiously, "I would like to see him when I have the chance." Nina said, "Then, like I said, follow me to the academy. I believe that with your outstanding performance, my teacher will definitely be willing to let you stay." Heath said, "We'll see." After crossing a small stream, the two of them came to a hillside. The terrain in front of them suddenly became clear, and they could vaguely see a town below. This was a seaside town, built according to the seaside. The sparkling sea surface, white sailing boats, crisscrossed piers, and tall lighthouses. The bright blue stone street and the Gothic-style single-story buildings on both sides of the street. It was beautiful and warm. Nina praised, "What an exquisite town. Is this the Allen you mentioned before? Are we going to stay here?" Heath nodded, "Yes." Purple coral was not something that could be found in a day or two, so Heath chose a base on the Gold Coast and lived while looking for it. "Great." After getting a definite answer, Nina jumped up happily and pulled her skirt in the air. Unlike Heath, who came from the secular world, Nina was a pure-blood born in the wizard world. She had been staying in the wizard tower for as long as she could remember and had never experienced the colorful secular world. The reason why she came out to explore this time was to see the exciting human world to a large extent. Unfortunately, before she could appreciate the colors of the human world, she met with an accident while exploring the Twilight ruins. Let's go quickly." Saying that, Nina took the lead and floated over there. She looked much more excited than Heath. Probably influenced by Nina, Heath looked at the small town at the foot of the mountain. He had more expectations for his future life. As his lifespan increased and his strength increased, Heath was no longer as anxious and worried about improving his strength as he was when he first entered the wizard world. Although his original intention of continuing to be powerful had not changed, he was more willing to spend some time to experience life while improving his strength. He wanted to live as an ordinary person and an ordinary human, to experience life. Magic itself originated from nature and from life. The insights gained from life were also of great help to the understanding of the rules and principles of magic, and were even indispensable. Many wizards would always play various roles in the secular world because they wanted to understand the rules and principles from life. What identity do I have to live in this small town? Heath pondered as he walked down. Whoosh! At this moment, a gust of wind suddenly sounded. A gust of strong wind suddenly swept up in the forest. This gust of wind was very strong. Trees swayed, flowers, and grass flew everywhere. A small tornado even appeared in the forest. What was even stranger was that the tornado seemed to have eyes, and it swept towards Heath. Heath frowned and took a step back. At the same time, the tornado stopped in front of him, but it did not disappear. A strange human face appeared in the tornado. The human face opened his mouth and a female voice sounded. "Wizard of the West Coast, you have crossed the border. This is the territory of the Golden Islands. If you want to enter, please tell me why you are here." Wizards all had a deep sense of territory, and they usually could not easily cross the border. Heath bowed and said, "I am Wizard Heath Noen of the Dark Forest. I need to go to the Gold Coast to collect purple corals." The female voice said, "Dark Forest." There was a hint of contempt in her tone. "That is the forest at the end of the West Coast, right? This is the territory of the Golden Islands. Why are you here?" In the entire wizard world, the Dark Forest was a small place that lived up to its name. Therefore, in the eyes of other wizards, wizards from those places were equivalent to country bumpkins. Heath said, "Recruited by the bloody battlefield." "I see." The human face pondered for a moment. She said arrogantly, "How about this? Our wizard master has something to do recently and has gone out. Now, on behalf of the wizard master, I will allow you to temporarily live in this forest. We will use this hillside as a boundary. When our wizard master comes back and gives the order, we will decide whether to allow you to enter." Heath was stunned. This is not in accordance with the rules of the Wizard World Alliance, right? According to the rules of the Wizard World Alliance, even if it was not the same area of the wizard world, the wizards could freely come and go. It was just that they had to pay a certain fee to collect materials and other activities in the other wizard world. The human face said, "This is the Golden Islands, not your dark forest." "All right, that's it." Heath frowned. "That's impossible." Chapter 248, Deep Sea. Heath frowned and rejected decisively, "That's impossible." This was not a question of whether he would agree or not. The other party clearly looked down on his Muggle identity and was deliberately looking for trouble. If he admitted defeat in such a matter, then his activities in this area might be affected. However, the face of the tornado did not seem to take Heath's words to heart. She continued to say arrogantly, "I'm not talking about you, but informing you." Heath coldly said, "What if I insist on entering?" The face of the tornado sneered. "Insist on entering? Then let's see if you have the ability to do so." When she said the last sentence, she immediately increased her tone. As the voice spoke, the tornado slowly expanded. Very quickly, it expanded by several times and turned into a huge tornado that was several meters tall. Crash! The violent sound of rushing wind rang out. Large amounts of sand and soil were swept into the tornado. A dark cloud even appeared above the head of the tornado. The entire world instantly turned grey, as if the end of the world had arrived. The sound of muffled thunder rang out from the dark cloud. From time to time, bolts of lightning would fall into the tornado, emitting a mighty aura from top to bottom. The tornado said coldly, "Get out of here." Heath did not give in and said, "Then let's see if you have the ability." The tornado was furious. "Good, good, good. You don't know what's good for you. Since that's the case, don't blame me for being impolite." As soon as she said that, the tornado shrank in and then suddenly expanded out. With a crash sound, a strong wind rose up, and a large number of wind blades flew out from inside, sweeping towards Heath in all directions. The wind blades came at him, but Heath was not in a hurry. With a thought, he released the mimicry shield. Silver light suddenly bloomed in front of his eyes, and a ball of silver liquid appeared in front of him and spread out in all directions, firmly wrapping Heath within. Puff! 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 When the two collided, a crisp sound was immediately heard, and cracks immediately appeared on the mimicry shield. Silver water splashed in the sky, and the mimicry shield was rapidly decaying at a speed visible to the naked eye. Heath was shocked by the scene. After he advanced to a wizard, the mimicry shield had been strengthened by him several times. He had used many high-level magic knowledge and runes, and its power was no longer what it was in the past. Now, the mimicry shield that he had adjusted could withstand at least 300 degrees of attack. In other words, the attack in front of him had already exceeded 300 degrees. No wonder she dares to be so arrogant. She really has some ability. If that's the case. Clang! A cold sword cry rang out as Heath pulled out Red Demon who was hanging behind him. At this moment, the mimicry shield had completely collapsed. The wind blades that filled the sky once again pounced towards Heath. Heath raised his cross-shaped sword and slashed towards the wind blades that filled the sky. Hoo-hoo! With a swing of his sword, a gale filled the sky. Countless wind blades appeared on the left and right sides of the cross-shaped sword. They were stronger and more intense than the wind blades that were swept out by the tornado. This is... The eyes on the face of the tornado person suddenly shrank. A rule-type spell? How is this possible? A shocked female voice sounded. At the same time that this surprised voice sounded, Red Demon also drew a cold light across the sky. He swept the wind blades that filled the sky and pounced towards the tornado like a general who was leading an army to attack. Wind blades versus wind blades. The wind blades released by the tornado could not withstand a single blow from Heath's wind blades. They were torn into pieces in an instant as if they were breaking dried twigs. The remaining wind blades continued to pounce towards the tornado in front of them. The situation had completely reversed. The face of the tornado was shocked. Not good. Realizing that things were not looking good, she hurriedly retreated and activated the wind wall in an attempt to defend. However, it was too late. How could Heath's sword wind be so easily blocked? The wind wall that was hastily supported was instantly torn into pieces. The remaining wind blades chased after the tornado behind them and tore the tornado into pieces in an instant. Huff! Huff! The remaining wind elements formed a blurry figure in the air. One could vaguely see that it was the silhouette of a woman. The figure glared at Heath and said, "I will remember you." With that, the figure disappeared with a whoosh. The tornado and the dark clouds above disappeared, and the forest returned to its previous tranquility. Hee hee hee. A pleasant chuckle was heard. Nina sat on a tree trunk next to them, swaying her long white legs. She said with a smile, "Heath, it seems that you've been targeted by someone." Heath said nonchalantly, that witch was looking for trouble. Even if she wanted to find trouble, she had to follow the basic law. No matter where he went today, he would always be in the right. Let's go. Sheathing and putting away his great sword, Heath continued the journey with Nina without looking back. On the other side, on the west side of the Gold Coast, on the island of the sea, Deep Sea Kiss. Deep Sea Kiss was a wizard organization on the west side of the Gold Coast. It consisted of more than 1,000 apprentices and had a wizard master who was close to high-level strength. It was considered a wizard organization with above-average strength in the entire Gold Coast. At this moment, in the guard room of the ancient castle of Deep Sea Kiss. Clang! The crystal ball shattered on the ground, and an angry scream came from the guard room. Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! With another ping-pong sound, a group of frightened green-skinned goblins ran out. Jackman, a 2-star wizard, stopped in his tracks. He reached out and grabbed a green-skinned goblin. Is something wrong? The green-skinned goblin answered nervously, Lady Alice's guard was broken by a wizard who trespassed. Lady Alice is very angry. Lady Alice is already throwing things. Jackman was stunned. Who is so bold? How dare he offend the wind sorceress? The Green Goblin said, a wizard from the west coast that has never appeared in the Golden Islands before. No one knows his identity. Jackman suddenly understood. All the wizards in this area and even the entire Golden Islands knew about Alice's bad reputation. Normally, they would not provoke her for no reason. However, if it was a wizard from another region, it would not be surprising. Okay, I got it. Jackman waved his hand and walked into the guard room. The guard room had been smashed to pieces. Crystal balls, wooden staffs, magic gems, and other materials were scattered all over the floor. A girl wearing a blue robe was standing in the middle. She was constantly taking all kinds of materials from the cabinet and throwing them on the ground. Her pretty face was full of anger. Jackman walked forward and said, Yay! 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 What happened to our sea breeze sprite? Who provoked you? Chapter 249, New Home. The girl in the hall saw Jackman enter and immediately walked up to him. Jackman, you're just in time. Bring your magic wand and we'll go out. Jackman was surprised. Go where? The girl said righteously, someone broke my wind guard. I want to lock such a crazy person into a water prison and let him accompany the ugly and smelly sea ghosts in the deep sea. Jackman pursed his lips. He pondered for a moment and said, Alice, stop fooling around. You're already breaking the rules. Alice said angrily, Oh my god, Jackman, what are you saying? I'm defending the dignity of Deep Sea Kiss and punishing that crazy person. Now, you're saying that I'm wrong. Are you serious? Jackman touched his forehead. How did you fight? Alice was speechless. Jackman continued, Did you make some strange requests, such as not letting others in? Alice said, The wizard master is in seclusion. I only asked him to wait. Isn't that right? Jackman said, Of course not. This is the Wizard World Alliance. We have an agreement between us. As long as the other party is not a dark wizard, they can come and go freely. It's not right for you to restrict others like this. Alice pouted. Jackman touched the top of her head lovingly. All right, my sister. Don't worry about such a small matter. Alice said angrily, But that person broke my wind guard. This debt cannot be settled like this. Jackman, you have to help me. Jackman knew that Alice would never stop causing trouble. After thinking for a while, he agreed, All right, all right, all right. How about this? I promise you that if there's a chance, I will help you teach that reckless brat a lesson. Is that all right? Alice pouted and did not say anything else. Jackman said seriously, All right, I think we should not waste our energy on these small matters. It's going to be the Deep Sea Feast soon. Let's focus on that. This year's Deep Sea Feast is extremely important to us. Teacher has high hopes for you and me. Don't let teacher down. Golden Harbor Town. This was a seaside town on the west side of the Gold Coast. It belonged to the Allen family. The town mainly focused on business and trade. Its permanent population exceeded 100,000. It was truly a big commercial town. On the west side of Golden Harbor Town, at the lighthouse cliff, there was an old lighthouse. 20 gold coins. Every inch of land in Golden Harbor Town is worth a fortune. You can't find a cheaper house here. This is not just a house, it's a whole tower. Don't look at how it's a little shabby. It used to be the most important place in this town. The Allen family spent a lot of effort to build it. Merchant Zachary on West Street introduced it to Heath indifferently. It was a typical medieval lighthouse. The theme building was a cylindrical tower, about 4 stories high. Under the tower was a small wooden house, where the former tower keeper lived. Heath walked in and looked around. The small house was an ordinary wooden house. There were bedrooms on both sides and a living room in the middle. It was about 30 to 40 square meters in total. Although it was not big, it was very comfortable to live in. There was also a small fence yard outside. In the future, he could plant some materials in the small yard. As for the lighthouse at the back, it was the most suitable to be used as a laboratory. In the dead of night, he could stand on the top of the lighthouse and enjoy the sea breeze while enjoying the passing of time. The more he looked, the more satisfied he was. Heath did not hesitate anymore and nodded. 20 gold coins. As he spoke, he took out 20 gold coins and handed it over. Zachary did not receive the gold coins immediately. Instead, he was stunned. This foreigner did not dress like a wealthy person, so he had been half-heartedly promoting the sale. He did not expect that the other party would take out the gold coins so readily. I actually sold this shabby place for 20 gold coins. Zachary was in disbelief. The expression on his face became much more cordial. He respectfully received the gold coins and put on a cordial smile. Okay, okay. Young master, you have made a wise choice. Believe me, you will like this place. After a pause, he continued to ask, Oh right, I haven't asked yet. Young master, are you alone? Heath nodded and asked, Why? Zachary said, No, don't misunderstand. It's just that this place hasn't been inhabited for a long time and needs to be cleaned up. In addition, this place is a little old. If you want to live here, it's best to renovate it. Do you need me to recommend a few craftsmen for you? They are the most outstanding craftsmen in the city. Heath shook his head. There's no need. This place indeed needed to be repaired, but it was a piece of cake for Heath, who had mastered magic. Zachary asked, Are you sure? He tried to persuade him again. With all due respect, professional work should be left to professional people to handle. The big ones are all gone, so it's not worth saving these few gold coins. If it's a mess, you'll still have to find someone to fix it. Not only will it waste your energy, but it'll also cost you more money. Don't you think so? From Zachary's point of view, Heath was clearly preparing to do it himself. Heath shook his head again. "Thank you for your kindness, but there's no need." Zachary said embarrassedly, all right. I'll go and handle the paperwork for the house for you right away. It'll take about 2 to 3 days. I'll send the documents over to you later. When that time comes, you can tell me anytime if you change your mind." Zachary was not in a hurry. He had seen too many clients who thought they could handle it, but in the end, they all took out the gold coins in their pockets in frustration. Heath nodded. "Okay." Zachary left. "Heath, this place really needs to be repaired. Otherwise, I bet it will leak." Nina pointed at the hole in the roof and said, "Moss has grown on it. The dust and garbage in the house also need to be cleaned." Heath said, "It's a piece of cake." As he spoke, he glanced left and right, and his gaze fell on the broom in the corner. He raised his right hand and snapped his fingers lightly. At the same time, the broom in the corner immediately came to life and began to clean automatically. Splash! The crisp sound of water flowing could be heard, and a large water ball appeared in the room. The wooden bucket next to it flew over immediately. The water ball fell into the wooden bucket and filled it to the brim. Towels, rags, mops, and all kinds of tools came to life. The ones that cleaned the table, the ones that swept the floor, and the ones that dusted. In just a short moment, the dirty room was cleaned clean. Clap, clap, clap. Nina clapped her hands. A very wonderful item was activated. Heath's gaze fell on the hole in the roof. "It's still too early to praise it." As he spoke, he clasped his hands together and pressed them to the ground. Then, Nina's jaw dropped. Chapter 250, Repair. As Heath pressed his hands on the floor, a large hexagram unfolded on the ground. At the same time, Heath began to chant a long incantation. As the incantation was chanted, the entire room seemed to come alive. The decaying wooden planks flew up and were covered by clusters of green light. The rotten parts on the wooden planks began to recover at a visible speed under the licking of the light. The broken elements were also rebuilt. Soon, they turned into pieces of brand new wood, as if they had just been cut from a tree. Heath stood up slowly. As he moved, there was only the sound of clattering, and all the soil on the ground flew up. At the same time that the soil flew up, a ball of flame surrounded and licked the soil and burned it, until it burned into a ball in the air. After the ball of soil had completely melted into lava, Heath extended his right hand straight into the lava and then clenched it. Ding! 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 A crisp sound rang out, and new rivets fell from Heath's palm one after another. He snapped his fingers again. These rivets and wooden planks immediately flew around like naughty children. They replaced the measurement, repaired the doors and windows, and renovated the roof and floor. In an instant, the originally rotten and dilapidated small wooden house had already become completely new. Nina, who was standing at the side, could not help but gape. Heath's simple action just now had used a variety of spells, such as plants, alchemy, activation, dissociation, and so on. It involved a wide range of knowledge, and the complicated structure of the mixed runes was not something that could be described in just a few words. One had to know that a wizard's energy was limited. Therefore, most wizards would only focus on the few spells that had the highest affinity with the elements, especially for a beginner wizard who had just entered the wizard level. It was already good enough to have a complete understanding of a certain element. How could they have the mood to dabble in other spells? She could not help but ask, "Just how many spells have you mastered?" She had thought that it was already ridiculous enough for a beginner wizard to master a rule-type spell. She did not expect that the other party had such a profound magic foundation. Heath smiled. "Countless." After renovating the small wooden house, Heath used magic to make some simple furniture, including beds, tables, chairs, benches, cabinets, and so on. In the field of magic, there were actually two ways to make furniture. One was to ensure that the material core was not only inconvenient to forcibly change its appearance, which meant that it was a shape-shifting spell or a transforming spell. The characteristic of this kind of spell was that it did not change the internal structure of the material, but only changed its appearance. The advantage was that it was convenient. As long as one's level was sufficient, anything could be changed. For example, turning a goat into a horse, a fire dragon, or a pumpkin into a carriage or even a castle. However, the disadvantage of this kind of spell was that it could not last long. No matter what kind of transformation spell it was, it had a time-limited effect. Moreover, the more changes there were, the more time limited the transformation spell would be. If one wanted to preserve the transformation spell for a long time, it would require a lot of effort, expensive materials, and so on. It was said that a witch used expensive materials to refine a special potion to turn a prince into a frog in revenge. Another way to make furniture was to use activation, alchemy, elemental dissociation, and other magic like what Heath had done just now. It was equivalent to creating it directly, but only by borrowing magic to save energy. The advantage of this method was of course that it was stable, but the disadvantage was that it was difficult. Don't look at how easy Heath made it look. It was because he had mastered a large number of magic spells. If it were any other wizard, just the process of extracting iron ore from the soil and shaping it into iron nails would be enough to make them collapse. Anyone who could use it as freely as Heath had just now was an old monster who had lived for hundreds or thousands of years with terrifying knowledge. It was no wonder Nina was so shocked just now. After dealing with the cabin, Heath cleaned up the yard outside. First, he cleaned up the trash and put a layer of soft grass on the ground. In the future, he was going to bring an oak tree and hang a swing on it to make a treehouse. Finally, he put a white fence around the outside and finished Heath's cabin. Clack! Clack! Standing in the yard, Heath clapped his hands lightly, satisfied with his results. The room was not big, but it was very warm. Great! Great! I like this yard. Heath, let's plant a tree here. A big oak tree. Nina seemed to be even more excited than Heath. She flew around the yard happily, sometimes commenting on the windows, and sometimes pointing at the furnishings. I love this place. With Nina's cheers, Heath's small yard was officially completed. In the evening, Heath's small house. Zi. The meditation candle was burning, and the dancing flames scattered colorful elemental light spots, filling the entire room. In the middle of the room where the enchantment was set up, Heath was sitting cross-legged on a soft cushion, meditating. The system's notification rang in his ears. Beep, elemental extraction successful. Spiritual power increased. Beep, elemental extraction successful. Spiritual power increased. After half an hour of this, Heath opened his eyes and ended his meditation for the day. Yawn. He yawned a little wearily. Heath rubbed the space between his eyebrows. Meditation was a task that consumed a lot of spiritual power. After every meditation, the wizards would feel very tired. In order to meditate for a long time, many wizards would specially prepare some potions and materials to recover their spiritual power. After a short rest, Heath opened the system and took a look at his condition. There was not much change, and his spiritual power was still around 190. After leaving the dark forest, the growth of his related spiritual power slowed down significantly. In the past few months, the total increase of his spiritual power was less than 2 points. This could not be helped. After all, the greatest increase in his spiritual power came from the system's extraction. However, he had not been able to extract any new substances recently. He could only rely on meditation to improve his spiritual power. Why not stay in the dark forest and train hard? Heath had considered it, but he had rejected it. The main reason was that he had extracted all the new substances that could be extracted from the area around Magic Tree Airport, including the new materials that flooded into the market every day. If he continued to stay there, he would not be able to get much improvement. As for going to other places in the dark forest that was filled with high-level demonized beasts, he, a low-level wizard, had better not run around. Moreover, he could not delay the matter of purple coral any longer. Otherwise, when he had enough spiritual force, he would be unable to advance due to the lack of sublimation water. He did not know how long he would have to wait. There are many places I have not been to in the Golden Islands. When I look for the purple coral, I will go and retrieve it. I wonder if the wizards of the Golden Islands will find trouble with me because of this. Thinking of this, Heath felt a headache coming on. Wizard organizations were all xenophobic. Looking at the scene in the forest, he knew that he had just arrived here and he had already been targeted. In the future, it would not be easy for him to participate in this generation. Should I go find Cursed? Heath remembered that the Grey Wizard who had been saved by him was a wizard from the Golden Islands, and he was also from the ruler of this place, Sea Crown. In addition, the Wayne family he belonged to was also a wizard family from the Golden Islands. Perhaps it could help him? But after thinking about it, Heath denied it again. The problem of xenophobia was not something that could be easily dealt with by anyone. Although the Wayne family was powerful, there were many people in it. Cursed might not be a direct descendant. Some of the nameless nobodies from the side family actually had the same status as Muggles. Let's just follow the rules. If it really doesn't work, we'll talk about it later. Heath decided in his heart. Knock, knock, knock. At this moment, there was a knock on the door. Heath initially thought that the merchant who bought the house had sent the documents over, but thinking about it, it didn't seem right. After all, didn't he say that it would take 2 or 3 days to complete the procedures? Who could it be?